board special session, which is an open session for board development. We're very excited. We have three outstanding presenters who are going to engage with us over the course of the day. And Chancellor Lambert, I'm going to hand it to you. Three outstanding presenters who are going to engage with us to talk a little bit about the purpose and overview. Chancellor Lambert. And before we do, I do want to welcome our board member-elect, Catherine Ripley, who is here today.
Welcome.
Congratulations. We really look forward to working with you. So welcome and thank you for taking the time to help participate today. Chancellor Lambert. You're muted, Chancellor. Chancellor Lambert, you're muted.
I always forget to unmute. So, well, good afternoon, everybody, and special thanks to Kat for joining us this afternoon. I know you didn't have to, but we really appreciate you being able to participate in board professional development. This afternoon's focus will be on three interrelated areas. One is just a refresher on open meetings and exec session, along with a conversation about the board's role from the Higher Learning Commission's perspective. And then we're just going to get in and do a brush up with Pam Fisher in terms of good board practices and the like. And hopefully, as we get through this afternoon's presentation, we walk away with some action plan as we go forward into the upcoming calendar year. So with that, Damien, I'll turn it back over to you to begin our first presenter.
Okay, so our first presenter today is Dean Grano. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, who is a staff attorney with the Arizona Ombudsman, Citizens Ombudsman, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. My name's Danny Garone. It's spelt weird, so I understand if it looks strange when you see it. I'm going to talk briefly about the Arizona open meeting law. But real quick, who do I work for? I work for the Arizona Ombudsman's Office. We are a state agency. We are part of the legislature. Typically what we do, most of our work is we take and investigate complaints against state level agencies. But when it comes to the open meeting and public records law, our authority extends down to the more local level as well. So to counties, municipalities, school districts, universities, and other public higher learning are exempt from our authority. So we don't have direct authority to investigate entities like yourselves, but part of our responsibility under the law is to educate the public and public officials on public records and open meeting law, which is why I'm with you today. And if you ever have a question about the public records law or the open meeting law, feel free to give me a call and bounce things off of me. So real quick, who has to comply with the open meeting law? Public bodies, which are basically defined as multi-member governing entities. So your councils, your boards, your commissions of state level entities, all the way down to little political subdivisions. So your governing board absolutely would be a public body subject to the open meeting law. The definition of public body also includes standing committees, special committees, advisory committees, and subcommittees. So what does that mean? If your board, your governing board creates one of these types of things, it is going to be its own public body subject to the open meeting law. So your standing committees, your subcommittees, they themselves are public bodies that need to comply with the open meeting law. The open meeting law goes a little bit further and specifically defines advisory and subcommittees. Usually we have an idea of what is meant by standing and special committees, but what are advisory and subcommittees? Basically, no matter what you call it, it's any entity your public body creates on motion and vote or by the presiding officer of your public body. So if your board says, hey, the three of you get together and go work on this issue and report back to us, that three-person entity, no matter what you label it, is either an advisory or subcommittee subject to the open meeting law. Who enforces the open meeting law? Generally, the main game in town is the Arizona Attorney General's office. They receive complaints and they'll investigate, and then they might put pressure on you to do X, Y, Z if they find that you're not complying with the open meeting law. Usually, if that'll take the form of admit you were wrong and get some training. Very rarely do they take it further, even though they can. They can take your public body to court to enforce the open meeting law, and the Attorney General's office is the only entity in the state under some changes made to the open meeting law a couple of years ago that can take you as an individual member of your public body to court. So board member Smith, you can be taken to court for violating the open meeting law by the Attorney General's office. Does that happen? Very, very rarely. Usually you have to show a repeated disregard for the open meeting law, or you have to be doing something intentionally sneaky to avoid it. Usually there has to be, basically reckless negligence or intentional violations of the open meeting law for that to happen. But if that does happen, it's going to be bad for you. It's not going to be a pleasant experience. So it's a good motivating factor for complying with the open meeting law. Additionally, the county attorneys throughout the state can enforce the open meeting law. They can take your public body to court to have a judge say what you're doing is violating the open meeting law and to rule to get you to do something. And then lastly, individuals can take you directly to court as a public body to enforce the open meeting law. And then again, usually public bodies may hear from our office. We don't have enforcement authority, but we do have broad investigative authority and the authority to report our findings publicly. But again, we don't have jurisdiction over the community college districts, so you probably won't be hearing from me. So what's a meeting? Generally, we're having a meeting right now. We know what the colloquial version or definition of meeting is, but of course it has a more complicated legal definition. The open meeting law basically defines a meeting so that it has two prongs you have to meet to be having a meeting. First, you have to have a gathering in person or through technological devices of a quorum of your public body. So you have to have a quorum gathered. And then second, you either need to be discussing, proposing, deliberating, or taking legal action. So if you have a quorum present and you're basically discussing or acting on anything that could foreseeably come before your public body for action, you're having a meeting, the open meeting law applies. If you don't meet both of these prongs, you're probably not having a meeting. The open meeting law probably doesn't apply. The definition was augmented by the legislature a couple of years ago to include this new language. This really didn't change the game. I think everyone who works with the open meeting law had always inferred that this was basically in the definition of meeting, but for whatever reason, the legislature decided to make it official and put it in there. So now you're also having a meeting subject to the open meeting law. If you make a one-way electronic communication to a quorum of your public body in which one of your members is proposing legal action, or if you have a multi-way exchange of communication about official business amongst the quorum of your public body through electronic means. So basically, if you propose legal action amongst the quorum of your public body through email or Twitter or whatever, you're having a meeting. If you have a multi-way discussion through those same means, you're having a meeting subject to the open meeting law. If you think about it, that all makes sense in light of what was previously the only meat of the definition, but now it's been augmented to explicitly include that extra bit. But I don't think that substantively changes the open meeting law. So usually you have to, do all your meeting public. You have to allow the public to attend. The public has to be able to see and hear what you're talking about. You need to have an agenda of exactly what you're going to be doing. That's the core of the open meeting law. However, the legislature has made an exception to that in the form of what are known as executive sessions. Basically, the open meeting law says you can tell the public you're going to have one of these, and then you get to go into private and have private discussions about whatever the topic is. So you tell the public you're having an executive session on whatever general topic, and you tell them what part of the statute enables it, then you get to have your discussion in private. So when you decide to have one of these, you must exclude the public. So you don't get to then pick and choose who gets to know what is being said and who doesn't. You have to exclude the public as a whole. There are 7 types of executive sessions. They're laid out in ARS 38-431.03. And whenever you have an executive session, it needs to fit neatly into one of those 7 types. You're not supposed to, according to the courts, interpret those 7 broadly and generally so that you're squeezing whatever type of conversations in. It needs to be pretty on point for the way the statute describes each of the 7. If you're going to have an executive session, it needs to be indicated on a public notice or agenda. So you don't just get to have a secret executive session that nobody knows about. You have to tell the public it's going to happen, the way the open meeting law specifically requires that you generally provide notice in the agenda. You need to have a public vote to go into executive session. So you need to vote in front of everybody to go into a particular executive session. Then you must keep the discussion confidential. Once you have one of these, you can no longer tell the public, no matter what was being said in executive session. So if you have an executive session, don't then later tell your friend down the street what was said in executive session by another board member. Don't tell one of your constituents. Do not tell anybody. You're not allowed to take a legal action in executive session. What's a legal action? Any collective decision. So if you find your board or your committee deciding what to do on a particular issue while in executive session, you're almost certainly violating the open meeting law. And then lastly, even though they're not going to be public, you need to have minutes or recording of your executive sessions. Something to keep in mind, just because you can have an executive session, should you, that's up to you to decide. Sometimes the public gets suspicious. Why are they going into private to talk about this issue? What are they going to say? Is whatever benefit you're gaining from having the executive session worth whatever the increase in public suspicion and skepticism is? Something to keep in mind. Who gets to be in an executive session? All the members of your public body. So if your governing board's meeting and your governing board has 7 members, those 7 members get to be there. If you're having a personnel discussion, which is one of the 7 types of executive session, there's nothing that specifically prohibits you from having that person there, although it's not required. The Auditor General can be there if they're conducting an audit, and then any other individuals whose presence is reasonably necessary to carry out the executive session. So having your attorney there, that usually makes sense, especially if you're getting legal advice or dealing with some legal issue. If you have a staff member who takes your minutes, that person being there is reasonable and makes sense. Your friend Bill down the street has never been part of government, wants to see how an executive session works. That's not going to cut it. He doesn't get to be there. It's not specifically required, but I would suggest putting on the record, so in your minutes or whatever other official record you have, indicating who was in the executive session, beyond the obvious, beyond your board members and maybe your attorney, and explain why that person needed to be there. So if for some reason you have an unusual person showing up to one of your executive sessions, I would indicate that and explain why they're there. I think that's a best practice. Some things to avoid when it comes to executive sessions. Do not talk about it. I always make this super corny joke, but I think it makes sense. If you've ever seen the movie Fight Club, you'll remember that the first rule and the second rule are don't talk about Fight Club. Same thing with executive sessions. Do not talk about what was said in executive session. Do not tell your wife, do not tell your husband, do not tell anybody. Your chair, the chair of your public body, is specifically required by the open meeting law to remind you every time you have one of these that it's confidential and not to reveal what is said in executive session. And then again, I know I'm a broken record, but it bears repeating, do not take legal action in executive session. You can discuss, for instance, whether to fire an employee in executive session, but if you want to then actually do it, you need to have a public vote. You need to either after the executive session or a future meeting, convene in public and explicitly vote to fire that person. You cannot vote to do it in executive session. I mentioned the executive session minutes or recordings are confidential, so then why do we even have them? Well, if somebody sues you and says you had an improper executive session that wasn't allowed, this is how you prove your case. You bear the burden of proof when dragged to court. So basically you're on defense when someone makes this type of allegation and takes it to court. So having your minutes or recording are your proof to show that you didn't have an improper executive session. So one of these minutes have to have pretty normal stuff, date, time, and where you met, which members were there, which members weren't. general description of what you were talking about or what you were considering. If you give instructions, some of the types of executive sessions allow you to give general instructions to a lawyer or a representative. If you decide to do that, for instance, you tell your lawyer, go see if they'll settle the lawsuit up, for up to $1 million. Well, indicate those instructions in the minutes or the recording, and then put whatever else you think are appropriate in the minutes or recording. And then keep them confidential. Somebody says, I'm making a public records request. This is a democracy. Let me see those minutes. You say, no, I'm sorry. I'm violating law if I give them to you. ARS 38-431.03B says I cannot give them to you. And that's the end of that. So then who does get to see those minutes or those recordings for executive sessions? If say it's your governing board, all the members of the governing board get to see the minutes for the executive session. If you have a personnel discussion, so if you're discussing whether to hire, fire, promote, demote, what have you, one of your employees, that employee, or perhaps ex-employee, is entitled to see the minutes or the recording for the executive session as it pertains to them. So if you have two different executive session discussions and only one has to do with their employment, that's the portion they get. The Auditor General in connection with an audit, and then any of the oversight agencies when they're investigating an open meeting law complaint. County Attorney, Attorney General, Ombudsman Office, a court, we all would get to see those minutes or those recordings. If you ever find yourself thinking, the open meeting law sure is a pain, what sneaky creative things can I do to get around it? You're probably violating the open meeting law. It's not a set of challenges to be overcome by creativity and clever legal thinking. It's a general principle of open government that the legislature has decided the public gets to generally see what we're doing and how we're doing it. So if you do what's known as splintering the quorum, aka a fancy game of telephone, you're probably violating the open meeting law. What does that look like? You say you got 5 members on your board, so a quorum is 3. Member A sends a letter to member B, who then explains what the two of them talked about, letter to member C, so it's reached a quorum. Even though that didn't happen simultaneously or verbally, it would be a meeting and it would violate the open meeting law. Similarly, don't shoot an email to the rest of your board members saying, hey, how are you all going to vote at the next meeting on topic A? If somebody then hits reply all and tells you, it's probably a violation of the open meeting law. Again, doesn't matter if it's verbal or nonverbal. You can violate the open meeting law in writing. You can do it in sound recordings. You can do it in smoke signals or clay tablets. If you can communicate human thought, you can use it to violate the open meeting law. And it doesn't need to be simultaneous. There's an AG opinion from 2005, which I don't think is very controversial these days, if it ever was, basically saying you can't use email to get around the open meeting law. If you can't do it verbally, you can't do it through an email. Same thing goes for other electronic communications. Watch out for Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, web page postings, web fora. So if you have a comment section on your board's website and multiple board members are going back and forth about something at the next meeting, arguably you might be creating a situation for an open meeting law violation. If your whole board is having a discussion about board business through an Instagram chat, you're violating the open meeting law, all that type of stuff. A few examples. So say you have a 5-member board, 3 is a quorum, so 3 triggers the open meeting law. Imagine member A sends an email to 2 of the other members, and then one of those 2 hits reply all. And that's on a business related thing. So it's about board business. That was a discussion or consideration amongst the quorum. Therefore, you triggered the open meeting law. You violated the open meeting law. Does it matter if you're sharing facts versus opinions as to whether you trigger the open meeting law? Probably not. If you look at the definition of meeting that I touched on a few minutes ago, deliberation is one of the things that triggers it when you have a quorum. You look at a dictionary, and one of the definitions is the collective acquisition and exchange of facts. So if I am on a board and I email the rest of the board and say, hey, here's a bunch of facts and stats on that issue we're going to be talking about, somebody replies back with some thoughts on those facts or some different facts, arguably that triggers the open meeting law and we violated the open meeting law. I'm not sure if you do it, but if you don't, it might be worth putting like a little open meeting law reminder in your email signature. I know most people ignore these, but they cost nothing to do. And in the history of Arizona, I'm sure they've saved a few people and reminded them that the open meeting law is a thing. So when you get something potentially from another board member, this might remind you, whoa, we got to take a step back and be careful about where we go from here. Staff can email you or reach out to you as a member of the board without necessarily violating the open meeting law. So just passively receiving information does not violate the open meeting law. That's how we send out agendas, supporting documentation, board packets, so on and so forth. Where it can get a little trickier is when the staff members start communicating the thoughts of other board members to you, or they send you all the board packet for the next meeting in one email, and then you start hitting reply all and discussing it. That's when you run into trouble. So as I alluded to earlier when we went over the new additions to the definition of meeting, generally you need to have multi-way communication to violate the open meeting law. So discussion, consideration, that's not just one person talking. That's multiple people talking when there's a quorum present. So if your quorum is 3, and so 3 of you are present and one person's talking and then another person responds, that would be discussion or that would be consideration. That would trigger the open meeting law. So usually one-way communication doesn't. So if I write an email to the rest of my board saying, boy, oh boy, is this point of view on item A for the next meeting really dumb for these reasons? If nobody else responds, that's probably not a violation of the open meeting law. The exception though is for when you propose legal action. That's one of the things that triggers the open meeting law, and proposing legal action really only takes one person. So if instead I email my whole board and say, here's the action I want us to vote to take at the next meeting. Even if nobody responds, if everyone else is like, whoa, we're not allowed to do this, I probably still violated the open meeting law by proposing legal action amongst the quorum of the board. So you need to be careful when you're talking to the rest of your board members outside of a proper meeting in which the public's been invited to listen and see. So then how do you propose an agenda item for a meeting without violating the open meeting law? If you're going to discuss amongst your board what you want on the agenda for the next meeting, it's going to be tough. You can do it, but it's very easy to cross the line into open meeting law violation territory. The key is you propose an item for consideration or discussion without communicating the particular legal action you want taken. So basically, you communicate the topic only, not what you want done on the topic. What does that look like? Imagine you're on a city council and you email the rest of your council and say, hey, at the next meeting, I want to discuss safety at First Street and Main Street. That's probably okay because that doesn't propose legal action. You didn't tell anybody what you want done about it. Now, instead, imagine you send the second email. We should install a crosswalk at First Street and Main Street. That would probably be a violation because you proposed a legal action to the rest of your board outside of a proper meeting. You want the board essentially to vote to spend money on a crosswalk. That's the action you want taken. That's more than just communicating the topic. That's proposing legal action. That would probably be a violation. Another example. You email the rest of your board and say, I think we should vote to fire, or we should consider firing board member A at the next meeting. That's probably a violation because you're proposing legal action, firing an employee. You're communicating what action you want taken. Now, instead, imagine you email the rest of your board and say, I want to discuss employee A's, the job they've been doing lately. That's probably okay. Even though there might be some reading in between the lines that you're unhappy about it, you haven't proposed what legal action, if any, you want taken on the matter. So that's probably okay. And then one more example. Imagine a board member sends an email to the rest of the board saying, we should implement a program like the one in the article I've attached to the email. It's probably a violation of the open meeting law because you proposed the implementation of a program. That's the action you want taken. If instead you just, without any comments or editorializing, send an article that talks about a program, that's probably okay. I still wouldn't recommend doing it because it's coming pretty close and it could lead the other members to reply and violate the open meeting law. But that in and of itself is probably okay. So these are ways you can discuss before a meeting or prior to a meeting with the rest of your public body what you want on the agenda for the next meeting. And I think as I just showed, it's pretty easy to slip up and say things in a way you're not allowed to and violate the open meeting law. So are there easier ways to do this? Yes. A lot of public bodies will designate one member of the public body, maybe your chair or your president, or even a staff member, to be the person who collects items for the meeting and then creates the agenda. So for instance, say I'm the secretary for a board. I'm not on the board. All the board members can send me their items they want discussed at the next meeting, and I can compile an agenda and then send it out for review and say, is everybody cool with this? If so, let me know, and that'll be the agenda. If not, let me know what you want changed. That way, there's no discussion amongst the quorum, and there's no threat of one member accidentally proposing legal action to the rest of the board. It goes through an intermediary, so they can all be gathered, they can all be cleaned up, and then presented to the board all at once. And they won't be attached to any individual. So even if some of the wordings may be a little off, it's you're in better shape because it's not clear who, if anyone, is proposing what. So that's a common way to avoid potentially violating the open meeting law, by deciding what you want on the agenda for a future meeting. And then just one more set of examples. Imagine you're a member of the board, you send an article to the rest of your board, and then somebody else hits reply all, so the whole board's seen it, with an opposing article. So say you send an editorial on a topic that's related to what your board does, and somebody sends you back an opposing one. Even though none of you gave your opinions, that might constitute a violation of the open meeting law, because you're essentially discussing something or arguing about something through proxies. So I would avoid doing that. Now imagine you have 3 board members exchanging emails on a topic that's going to be talked about at the meeting tomorrow, but the quorum for your board is 4. So you haven't reached a quorum. That's probably okay, as long as you're not trying to avoid accountability. So if those 3 people call each other and say, hey, let's discuss the issue and how we're going to vote, and at the meeting we'll all be in sync and none of us will talk or have to voice any opinion to the people. We'll just vote without explanation. If you were dumb enough to decide to do that and put it all into some sort of email that the AG could get their hands on, that would probably be a violation, or at least arguably a violation, because you're essentially hiding your discussion from the public. But if you just happen to talk with less than a quorum, you just happen to talk about an issue for a few minutes, then you bring it up and discuss it again at the meeting, that's probably okay. It's risky, but it's probably okay. You can't, as a board member or a committee member or what have you, you can't knowingly ask your staff to violate the open meeting law. So I can't go to the rest of my board and say, hey, vote to spend $1,000 on a new park or a new equipment at the next meeting. So I can't do that. I can't ask our staff to go to the rest of the board and say, hey, Danny wants you all to know that he wants you to vote to spend this money at the next meeting. I'll be violating the open meeting law, and so will that staff member. And I can be sanctioned, and so probably can that staff member who knowingly aided me in violating the open meeting law. The open meeting law specifically says all those in charge of or charged with interpreting the open meeting law should interpret it in favor of openness. So if you have a gray area or something that's not clear under the open meeting law, you're supposed to resolve it in favor of openness. So in those tough when in doubt situations, err on the side of transparency and openness to the public. Big note here. One of the main reasons to avoid messing up violating the open meeting law, if you take a legal action and then it's found that there was an open meeting law violation related to that legal action or something super serious. So say you at a meeting, you voted to spend $1 million on something, and then later you figure out you didn't post a public notice or agenda, that legal action is probably going to be held null and void by a court. So if there are bad enough open meeting law violations, it can totally undercut the legitimacy of some of your actions, and that can cause all sorts of trouble for you. That's a big motivating factor to make sure you're complying with the open meeting law, especially the big stuff. Additionally, there are penalties potentially for violating the open meeting law. If you as an individual member of your public body are found to have or somebody who aids a member in violating the open meeting law is found to have knowingly violated or aided somebody in violating the open meeting law, you can be on the hook if a court finds that it's your second violation. up to $500 fine. If it's third, fourth, and so on violation, up to $2,500. The first one is apparently a freebie because it's not addressed in the open meeting law, but second, third, and so on can get pretty pricey. Additionally, a court can order equitable relief as is appropriate, which that's in the discretion of a judge. I would feel nervous that the judge just gets to do whatever they think is fair and charge you with it. So avoid violating the open meeting law. And then additionally, you can be dinged personally for attorney's fees. So if the AG takes you to court and gets a court to say, yeah, you knowingly violated the open meeting law, they can basically make you pay the AG attorney's fees. So all of that can really get pricey. So that's why you don't want to violate the open meeting law. Don't do what you know is a violation. And if you're found individually liable for violating the open meeting law, you're on the hook for it. You don't get to have your public body pay it for you. The open meeting law specifically prohibits that. Again, only the Attorney General can make any of these individual penalties happen. It used to be, it was open to the world, but now it's just been reduced to just the Attorney General's office. But they're pretty active in taking and investigating open meeting law complaints. So it's a possibility if you're flagrant and intentional enough with your violation. There is a defense in the open meeting law. So if you see something happening at your meeting that you know is probably a violation, you can object on the record and say, hey, I think this is probably a violation, but nobody else cares and it's going on anyway, so I'm going to participate. So if you get then brought to court by the AG, you can use that as a defense, saying, I knew, I objected, and I only participated reluctantly so that my voice would be heard. Hopefully a judge will take that into account for you. And then lastly, if a court not only finds you knowingly violated the open meeting law, but with the intent to deprive the public of information. So basically, not only did you know and not care, you were also trying to hide stuff from the public. You can, in addition to those penalties on the previous slide, you can be tossed out of office by a court. And then theoretically, depending on how serious it is, you could even be charged with a minor crime. So those are all of the very serious reasons not to knowingly violate the open meeting law. Okay, so I gave you all that scariness. Just a quick note. You're probably going to mess it up at some point. You're going to accidentally get off track and talk about something that's not on the agenda, or you're accidentally going to send an email you shouldn't have without realizing it. You're not going to get dragged to court. You're not going to get fined for that, most likely. If you do it over and over and over again, no matter what anybody tells you, then you might. But the point is, it's hard to not occasionally have a small lapse. The key is to learn from it and aspire to do better, and don't do anything you know is wrong. That's when you're really going to run into trouble. So if people keep reminding you that what you're doing is wrong, or you read the Attorney General's handbook and go, I don't think I'm allowed to do that, and then you go ahead and do it anyway, that's when you're really barking up the wrong tree. So if you call me and say, hey, am I allowed to do this? And I shoot you an email back saying, almost certainly not, you do it anyway, and then the AG finds out, that's how you might get in more serious trouble. Anyway, that's my abbreviated spiel on the open meeting law. We have some resources on our website, including a really comprehensive handbook that has all the statutes and 40 pages of analysis from the Attorney General's office. So I recommend downloading a copy of that. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
Does the board have any questions?
Excuse me,
Yes, who is that?
Maria.
Yes, Ms. Garcia.
Okay, so let me ask a real quick question here. So discussions it was my understanding that discussions were held in executive session could not be spoken outside of the executive session because that's violating open meeting law. You could talk to maybe one person, am I right or am I wrong?
Talk to what type
One
of
board member. Say, for example, there's a 5-member board. So you discuss something in executive session and you discuss it with another board member. You're not taking any action. You're just having a discussion. Is that violated open meeting law?
So you had an executive session discussion amongst your board, and then later you bump into one of the board members and you continue what you were talking about in executive session?
Right.
I think that's probably a violation of the open meeting law. It's not 100% clear that situation is not explicitly addressed, but you're not supposed to talk about, once you leave executive session, the conversation's supposed to be over on the topic. And then two, you have the double whammy of sort of depriving the rest of the board members of hearing what you're talking about and having like a secret side discussion. It's not amongst a quorum. So arguably that's less of a problem, but I don't think a judge and the attorney general would look fondly upon that. So I would go out of my way to avoid doing that.
Okay, but then that only has to do if it's a discussion based on something that you spoke about in executive session.
So if you just bump into another board member at the grocery store and you just start talking about some random topic, is that okay?
Yeah, yes.
If your board has more than 3 people on it, so if your quorum is more than 2, that's probably okay. So say you have 7 people on your board, board member A bumps into board member B at the grocery store, and they talk about, how crazy the budget numbers are looking. That's probably okay, as long as they're not then going to hide that discussion from the public. So if at the meeting they're then just completely mum and don't say anything and give each other like side eye and then vote in unison, that might be a problem. But if they just talk for a few minutes at the grocery store, it's probably not a violation. I wouldn't suggest doing it, but it's probably
Okay.
not a violation of the open meeting law.
Okay, thank you.
Could you tell us, I mean, in our context, we have a 5-member board. So if there were 2 members who were meeting to discuss, I mean, 2 members would represent less than a quorum. And there were discussions about topics that were about to appear on the agenda or had been agendized for action, or items from the executive session. Is that something that, I mean, you talked about how less than a quorum could still be a violation. Could you talk about that in the context of our board with 5 members and 2 members having conversations?
Anytime a board comes to me and says, hey, can we have just under a quorum get together and talk about stuff? I always say you really shouldn't. It goes against the whole purpose of the open meeting law, which is that the public can see your decisions and what's leading up to your decision. So even though you might not make a decision, the public's going to miss out on what you're thinking as a decision maker and what the other people are saying and what's crafting your opinion on the topic. So even though there are certain situations where it might not be explicitly illegal, it, 1, goes against the spirit of the open meeting law, and 2, the closer it is to a quorum, the more likely it is that the AG is going to come after you and say, they're going to use that last bit of the open meeting law that I said. It says, when in doubt, operate in favor of openness. That's something that sort of allows the AG to kind of enforce the spirit of the open meeting law sometimes. So if you're 1 member below a quorum, it will appear that you're intentionally skirting the open meeting law, that you want to discuss as much as you can privately and hide it from the public. So even if that's not true, the appearance will be bad. People who see you might flip out about it, complain about you, sue you. And since you only have 5 members, if it's 2 and you have this long conversation, someone catches on camera or there's documents of, and then you don't say much at the meeting, it's going to look bad and you might get in trouble. But if you just bump into each other at the grocery store and talk about something for a few minutes and go, oh, well, we'll touch base more at the meeting. You don't have to go home and check over your shoulder and worry about like getting dragged into court for that. But if you start making intentional little mini meetings where you're coming in just below a quorum, that's probably going to run you into trouble in the long run. So I would avoid that. Plus, it starts to look like you're making committees. So if I reach out to board member B and say, why don't the 2 of us go meet and talk about this and hammer some stuff out? That's going to sort of look like we're creating like an ad hoc committee, which, as you recall, those are subject to the open meeting law generally. So that's another way someone might take you to court and put pressure on you, or the attorney general might come knocking and say you really shouldn't be doing that. So my long-winded answer is, depending on the situation, it's probably okay if it happens once in a while, but you really should try to avoid it.
Are there other questions from members of the board? I can't see everybody, so you will have to just type in.
Damien, I have one question.
Hannah, yes.
Danny, well, thank you. That was very comprehensive. That's really good. Probably the best explanation I've seen on my 6 years on the board. But is there there's probably no penalty for a third person. So if somebody gets information from a board member and acts on it, knowing that that information came from an executive session? Is there any penalty for that person, any onus on that person to say, hey, I found out about it?
So if somehow a member of the public can guess what was said in executive session?
Or they're told specifically by somebody on the board, it happened in our executive session. I think you should know about this. Is there any penalty for that person if they take action?
So how would that person take action if they're not on the board?
Say they learned that we were going to purchase something, a piece of
Okay.
property.
So almost like insider trading type of thing. So a member of the public finds out what was said at executive session, and they use that information to their advantage. Can that member of the public get in trouble?
Correct.
Not under the open meeting law, but that member of the board who told them sure can get in trouble. Are there other ways that might be a problem for that member of the public? Maybe. If so, it's outside of my expertise, but it wouldn't be an open meeting law violation on their part. If they weren't there and they just find out about it somehow, they're not bound by the open meeting law, but that board member could get in a lot of trouble. So if a board member starts leaking to their pal to give their pal more advantageous pricing on things or heads up so they can invest in stuff before it becomes more valuable, that's the type of thing that's going to get them in a lot of trouble if there's evidence of that. So do not do that would be my advice.
Okay, are there additional questions? I have actually a few more, but if there are, yes, Ms. Ripley.
Hi, yes, thank you. And forgive me if this is too basic, but I'm learning and in the spirit of learning. So I want to make it clear that I understand that we can share information that's info only as long as it doesn't infer action. For instance, as I gear up to become a board member, I will be looking for articles or background or historic documents to read, get myself up to speed. And in preparation for like the first or following board meetings, rather than show up and it's a surprise what the topics are, is it okay for me to start schooling myself up by reading these articles?
So if you were to email the rest of your board and say, hey guys, again, I'm new to this. I don't know nearly as much as you guys do. Can you just send me like whatever you think might be relevant for the upcoming meeting and I'll absorb it all? And they just fire off a whole bunch of pre-existing information or old meeting minutes or old articles and you just eat them up. There's no problem with that.
Okay.
The problem then lies with if somebody hits reply all and starts editorializing on that and saying, here's why I think that article's dumb and you should think this. So it's not wrong for people to just send you information and past budgets and new regulations from the feds and all that type of stuff. I'd say the more common way that that's done usually is staff would provide that to you. So very often you'll have a meeting where there'll be all sorts of information you're going to need to brush up on. And usually that's all collected by the chair, the president, staff, and then the staff will send out what's known as like a board packet. And they'll send you like all the supporting documents and the draft resolution that you discussed at the last meeting and now you're going to be voting on and annotations and all that stuff. That's usually available to the public via a public records request. So there's no problem with you seeing it and bringing yourself up to speed so you actually know what's going on at the meeting. It's just, you run into more problems when it ends up being back and forths about the information. So if someone sends you a bunch of articles and you say, you know, that doesn't sound right. Here's a bunch of stuff I read to the contrary. Here's why I think this is more compelling. That's where you're going to run into trouble. Save that for the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, that was clear. Thank you.
Terrific. Are there any other questions? Okay, then I do have a couple others. So one is, could you, this is sort of because of COVID and because we've been moving our meetings into a virtual environment, the Zoom and the context of doing these digital virtual meetings, particularly in the executive session, I think creates a little more complexity. Could you give us sort of best practices that you've seen in terms of holding these executive sessions, going into should we be going to private spaces? Sometimes some people are living with other people in their families and people are walking through the rooms. Is there any sort of insight you can give us on that? And sort of the same sort of in the same vein as that, would you suggest not taking notes as part of the executive session, as that becomes sort of a physical record of the meeting that then, sort of can make its way out into the world, or can be public records requested, and it's unclear what is and what isn't part of the executive session? So that's my first question.
I would be careful about taking notes of specifically what other people say. So if another board member says all this really interesting or really annoying stuff that you disagree with and you take it all down, you got to be really careful with those notes. You can't let anybody else see them. They probably won't be subject to a public records request because they contain information that can't be shared. But I would be careful about taking down in detail in your own personal notes too much of what is said in an executive session. But I don't think there's necessarily anything illegal or unlawful about taking those notes. It's just they could lead to problems. So just be careful and on how you do that. As far as how the heck do we handle the coronavirus era of open meetings, everybody's been left scrambling and kind of figuring it out, especially public bodies that weren't broadcasting prior. There were the more wealthy and the bigger the public body, so the bigger cities, the counties were more prepared for it. The smaller jurisdictions that didn't even record their meetings are having a tougher time. So I don't really have best practices for you because there's different programs and different ways of doing it. What I would suggest though is making sure you facilitate as many people as you can. You do have technologically inept or people who are on the older side of things and maybe don't even have computers. So be cognizant of trying to accommodate those people as best you can. I think with this meeting, you could call in with a phone number. That's great stuff. I think that's the way Zoom meetings usually work. So try to do stuff like that. So not only can people participate, on the video and see and hear you, but maybe if they don't have a computer or they have a crappy internet connection, they can call and listen. That's what I would suggest if possible. What do you do about a remote executive session? You got to be really careful. Don't just do it in the same meeting unless you can kick all the members of the public off and nobody will call in the middle. So either hold your executive session under a separate Zoom meeting that you don't give out any public information for, or something similar so that people can't just sneaky hide in the shadows and listen to your meeting without you realizing it. What do you do about family members when you're having a remote executive session? That's really, you just got to do what you can do to get away from them. I'd recommend not just sitting in your living room with your 3 closest family members all sitting there, just out of view, listening to everything being said. But if you're in a room with a closed door and your husband or wife walks by and hears 5 words said, it's probably not the end of the world. It happens. People can walk by a door in a hallway in a municipal building and maybe catch a couple of words. Just take reasonable precautions. Do what you can to limit the likelihood that anyone will hear. And once you do find out someone might be able to hear, adjust. If you realize that your neighbor through the wall, it's like the movie Office Space, and they can hear every word being said, then you need to do something. You can't just continue operating that way and just throw caution to the wind. But otherwise, it's really just been a learning. Everyone's doing it a little differently. Everyone's using a different program. People are trying to figure out how to do open calls to the public remotely. It's a little bit like the wild, wild west of figuring out how to take 40-year-old open meeting law and all of a sudden cram it into, on the fly, all these remote meeting software options. So good luck, I guess, is where I end on that one.
It looks like Ms. Garcia has another question, but you're muted. Ms. Garcia, you're muted.
Okay, I guess where Damien was coming from, I'm not sure where that is, but as a board member, me and Luis, basically, he comes over here to participate in the meetings. Sometimes because he has a house at home that's full of kids. And so I've agreed to that. So I don't believe that that's a violation of any kind because we're in the same meetings. We would be in presence anyway.
Normally in normal times, you'd all be sitting in a room
Right.
view of the public. So if you're just on two computers or sitting in front of the same camera in the same room, there's no issue. The problem is before the camera's turned on or after the camera's turned off, if you just keep going.
Right. We don't do that.
Could lead to issues. But if you're not
Okay.
doing that, there's no problem with you being in the same room from an open meeting law perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
And then I have one more hypothetical question. If during the course of our executive session, I take information and then I, coordinate with a friend of mine who writes a letter, and then I submit that letter under my name back to members of the board or the committee or to other leadership in the college, would that constitute a violation of the open meeting law and violation of the executive session? And this would be somebody who wasn't on the board helping to craft.
If you tell them what was said in the executive session, yes. If you just go ask them some questions and talk to them, no. Because here's another situation that might make it more obvious. Imagine you have a discussion on whether to fire somebody in executive session. Then and you give your opinions to the other board members. Then in public, you're going to do some more discussing and then vote on it. And you give your opinions on why you're voting yes or no at the meeting. Those are very likely might mirror what you said in executive session, but that's okay. It's not like because you said something in executive session, you're not allowed to ever say it to anyone else ever again. The key is don't tell anybody that you said it in executive session, and don't tell anybody what other members said in executive session. So don't stand up at the meeting where you're going to vote and say, board member so-and-so said we should fire you for these reasons in executive session, and here's why I disagree. That's going to get you in trouble. But if you just stand up and say, here's why I don't think we should fire them, and those just so happen to be the same reasons you gave while in executive session, that's okay. So say you hear something really interesting in executive session, and at the next meeting, public meeting, you want to be able to sort of address it or give what would be like a response to it or even elaborate on it. You want to go confer with a staff member or some member of the public and say, hey, here's an issue I've been thinking about. What do you think about it? And you can talk to them about it. Just don't tell them what anybody said in executive session. Don't imply that somebody said something specific in executive session. And then you could stand up at the meeting and say whatever you want. You don't lose the ability to talk about stuff just because it was said in executive session at one point. The point is nobody gets to know what was said in executive session. Does that make sense? Okay. That's my take on it.
Yep.
Okay. Are there any last questions? Okay, we really appreciate your insight. Again, as Mr. Hanna said, this is one of the most comprehensive sort of summaries of the open meeting law that I've heard in my time in public office. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. And we appreciate you being a resource that we can reach out to if we have additional questions. And thank you for the key resources and the links to the additional publications. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Just one quick item for the new board member. On our website, I have in the beginning of quarantine when we didn't know what was going on, I actually created a 90-minute more comprehensive open meeting law PowerPoint that I narrate. And so you can just watch it as a video on our website. So if you want a little bit more meat on the bone as a new board member, I suggest checking that out when you have some downtime. It goes into all the nits and nats of the open meeting law. Otherwise, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Damien,
yes.
Can I make a quick comment?
Of course.
I just wanted to say that even before COVID, and of course, sat through lots of these kinds of discussions with boards. One of the things I've observed is that the best well-intentioned board members sometimes forget where they heard something. You're talking about a complicated issue and you've been talking about it for weeks or even months. And then you go into this open discussion that's public and you draw from here and you draw from there. And I'm just saying it's really easy to forget that was something I learned somewhere else. And then, although I have heard at least a couple of colleagues say in the open meeting, well, remember when we discussed in open, and then of course, when that happened, all the colleagues jumped on him and he said, oh yeah, sorry, but the cat was out of the bag. So I'm just saying it's a little, even if you understand it, it's a little harder to follow than you might think.
We really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Our next item is item number 3, which is accreditation, standards, expectations, and consequences. And who's joining us today is Dr. Linnea Stenson, who is our liaison to the Higher Learning Commission. Dr. Dr. Stetson.
Thank you so much for the invite, Mr. Klinko and Chancellor Lambert. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with your board. And now I am going to share something here. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, does everyone have the big front page slide there?
I believe we do, yes.
Okay, excellent. Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about accreditation and specifically where the board intersects with accreditation standards that we have. But let's start with a little kind of at the beginning. What is accreditation? And it is a process of external quality review created and used by higher education to scrutinize colleges, universities, and programs for quality assurance and quality improvement. And there are a couple of different kinds of accreditation. One is specialized accreditation, and these are program specific. So nursing programs, for example, HVAC programs, business programs, law programs, and so on have specialized accreditors that oversee their programs. And these accreditors are often linked to professional associations. The other kind is institutional level accreditation, and institutional accreditors evaluate the capacity of the entire institution. We may approve, for example, specific programs, but we're less in some respects evaluating the program and more about the institution's ability to offer the program in a quality sort of way. When we look at institutional level accreditors, these are the accrediting, the primary accrediting bodies that we have. We have been up until July 1st of this past year, we were called regional accreditors, but we've gone, the Department of Ed has made us all institutional level accreditors. And so there's our region, the big blue blob in the middle. You can see you all are kind of on our western edge. West Virginia is on our eastern edge, and there's a lot of stuff in between. So Higher Learning Commission established in 1895. So we have been around for some time, and as you can see from this template, actually we are this year have been celebrating 125 years. Our mission: serving the common good by assuring and advancing the quality of higher learning. And among our membership, we have a little bit of everybody. We've got 2 years and 4 years, very large comprehensive institutions, tribal colleges, liberal arts colleges, single purpose institutions, nursing schools, for example, or business schools, large R1s, research universities, and in fact, some all online institutions. So we really have pretty much, at least one of every kind of these kinds of institutions. And institutional accreditation is actually very important for a number of reasons. So first off, we use peer review to help us assess and ensure that quality is happening, high quality is happening on institutions with their programs. We believe that accreditation, in fact, builds and maintains confidence in, I'll call it kind of the higher ed ecosystem by assuring to the public making assurances to the public about the quality of the higher education there. As you've seen, we have a number of a wide variety of institutions as part of our membership. And part of what we think is important about institutional accreditation is, in fact, it allows for voluntary self-regulation. We think people in higher ed know the best about higher ed, just as we think doctors know the best about doctoring. So we think that that's important. But there's a few other reasons that are actually, I think, kind of above the other ones in a way. The first is certainly that we think our processes are really a way of encouraging institutional self-knowledge. And part of that happens because we expect a wide variety of involvement in an institution's planning and evaluation from faculty, staff, and in fact, the board. And these last two are really, in some respects, the most important. One is that eases transfer credit from one, and I've got regionally here, and I should probably put that in quotation marks, from one regionally accredited institution to another. And perhaps the most important reason is that the Higher Learning Commission's accreditation of your institution is what allows you to participate in Title IV funding for students. That's federal financial aid. So that's a really, in some ways, possibly the most important reason to have institutional level accreditation. There are sort of three parts to accreditation with the Higher Learning Commission. One are the guiding values, and those are really kind of the baseline values for institutions and provide the base for our criteria and the assumed practices, our assumed practices. Sort of the second level are those assumed practices. These are things that we don't believe would generally vary from institution to institution or mission to mission. In fact, they are matters of fact rather than judgment. So for example, the institution evaluates all credit that it receives in transfer. That's a yes or a no. Either you do it or you don't do it. And then finally, our criteria for accreditation, and these are the standards that we have, and we've established these as a way of helping our institutions both demonstrate how they are achieving that quality, but also it provides the basis for evaluation. So let's take a few moments, and what I'm going to do is go through both the guiding values, the assumed practices, and then the criterion, and talk specifically about the ways that it impacts or is connected, interwoven with a governing board. So just generally, our guiding values focus on student learning, education as a public purpose, education for a diverse, technological, globally connected world, a culture of continuous improvement, evidence-based institutional learning and self-presentation, integrity, transparency, and ethical behavior or practice, governance for the well-being of the institution, 3 more, planning and management of resources to ensure institutional sustainability, mission-centered evaluation, and then accreditation through peer review. So let's dig in a little bit on this governance for the well-being of the institution. Our guiding value says that the well-being of the institution requires that the governing board, members of the governing board, place the well-being of that institution above interests of its own members and the interests of any other entity. And I think that, this could be a little, I don't want to say tricky, but I think this could be somewhat complicated, particularly for elected board members. And I know that you all are elected board members. And I think sometimes there's a thought that, well, we're elected board members, and so we are, in some ways, we're beholden to the people who elected us. No, you're beholden to the institution. The people who've elected you have elected you to, in fact, look after the well-being of the institution. And so it's important that the interest of the institution is above the interest of yourself, and in some ways anybody who may have helped you be elected. Again, those folks voted for you to look after the institution. And because we accredit the institution itself, we actually hold that governing board, we hold you accountable for very specific aspects of your institution. So governing board must have independent authority for that accountability and must hold itself independent of undue influence from individuals, be they donors, elected officials, supporters of athletics, shareholders, or any others with personal or political interests. And that the governance should include a significant role for faculty. We always say faculty own the curriculum. And so it's important to recognize the special role that faculty have on your campus relative to curriculum and student performance, and so on and so forth. So foundational to the criterion core components then are the assumed practices. Again, this is sort of, if you will, layer 2 of what we look at when we are working with an institution. These assumed practices, as I said, are generally facts. They're sort of yes or no questions, as I said, like with transfer, they're unlikely to vary between institutions. And so then looking at our assumed practices, they really fall into 4 areas. One is integrity, ethical and responsible conduct. Second area, teaching and learning, which is about resourcing teaching and learning. The third area is, again, teaching and learning, and that's about evaluating and improving teaching and learning. That's kind of a constant that you should do. And then finally, we have a set of assumed practices around resources planning and institutional effectiveness. So let's dive in a little bit here. So one of the pieces of our ethical and responsible conduct goes to the governing board, and you are a publicly elected board, and so in fact you all are actually public members of your board. There's an assumption that that as all of you being public members, there is an assumption that you aren't in fact employed in some way, shape, or form by the institution itself. A company that does some kind of substantial business with the institution, some kind of relationship to a parental or a superordinate entity relative to the institution. And here we are. Yes, publicly elected members. So you are all public members. Another assumed practice here is that governing board has the authority to approve the annual budget and to engage and dismiss the chief executive officer. So those are 2 practices that we feel are fundamental and are relative to the governing board. And now finally, we'll dive in to our criteria for accreditation. And as I said, these are the standards by which your institution, by which Pima is evaluated. And there are in fact a number of criteria that are related very specifically to the governing board. This is just a kind of a screenshot of our webpage. Our criteria are built into our policy. And if you sort of look along the right-hand side there, you can see, you can look at the assumed practices if you want. We have obligations of affiliation. These are things such as, let's say if a specialized accreditor took a negative action toward the program that it accredits, we expect Pima to report that to us. So there are certain obligations of affiliation. And then the evaluative framework, which you can go and see. But let's look at each criterion. So criterion 1, institution's mission is clear and articulated publicly. It guides the institution's operations. Well, we start with mission. We think that is the basis from which everything should flow. So what do we have in criterion 1 about the governing board? Core component. So 1A is a core component, and that is the institution's mission is articulated publicly and operationalized throughout the institution. Where is the governing board involved in this? Well, we might expect the governing board to regularly review and approve of the mission, or make sure that the mission is aligned with whatever practices or programs and so on make sense for that institution. Criterion 2 is about integrity, ethical and responsible conduct. And sort of the big overarching standard here is the institution acts with integrity, its conduct is ethical and responsible. Digging in a little bit here, the institution follows policies and processes to ensure fair and ethical behavior on the part of its governing board, administration, faculty, and staff. So what are the sorts of things we might look to for evidence of the governing board's participation in this? Well, we might look to see that there are conflict of interest forms, perhaps signed by the governing board, that there may be a board audit, and of course, ongoing training for the board, which is what we're doing today. Another core component to criterion 2 is the governing board of the institution is autonomous. And I love that word, autonomous, to make decisions in the best interest of the institution in compliance with board policies and to ensure the institution's integrity. And I have to say, I found the open meeting law part of this really very interesting. I think quite bracing and really shows something about needing to pay attention, right? What are the sorts of things we might look to? Well, we're going to look and see, are there policies, bylaws? How are board members, we know in this case, elected? How do they evaluate themselves? Are there board minutes? Can we find board approval of planning and budgeting documents and so on? Onboarding and orientation for the board. So again, these are the sorts of things we're going to look at to see that the board is behaving with ethical and responsible conduct. Criterion 3 and criterion 4 are actually both about teaching and learning. And so criterion 3, I always call it's kind of about the front end of teaching and learning. So the institution provides high quality education wherever and however its offerings are delivered. What might the board have to do with this? Well, we might look to see if the board is utilizing data to help the institution make any decisions around student learning. How involved is the board in looking at this and thinking about this? Criterion 4, evaluation and improvement, teaching and learning, evaluation and improvement. And here, institution demonstrates responsibility for the quality of its educational programs, learning environments, and support services, and it evaluates their effectiveness for student learning through processes designed to promote continuous improvement. And so again, institution ensures the quality of its educational offerings. That's the very first core component. What might we look for in terms of the governing board? Well, how is the board engaged in, for example, academic program review processes? Does the board require that an institution do academic program review processes? How do they help the chief executive officer, and again, through that delegation of authority, make sure that this happens and make important decisions relative to both adding programs as well as sunsetting other programs. And then our last criteria is criterion 5, resources planning and institutional effectiveness. And the overarching statement, institutions' resources, structures, processes, and planning are sufficient to fulfill its mission, improve the quality of its educational offerings, and respond to future challenges and opportunities. And I always say, like, this is the board can help an institution plan for the future. So our core component, through its administrative structures and collaborative processes, the institution's leadership demonstrates that it is effective and enables the institution to fulfill its mission. What might we look for? Well, we're going to look to see if the governing board is showing knowledge and oversight of the institution. What other ways are we looking for shared governance in that institution? So again, each of the criteria, and these are central to both how your institution will show quality improvement, quality assurance, and quality improvement to the Higher Learning Commission. And it is these same criteria that when you are reviewed by our peer reviewers, they will use these same criteria to evaluate the work that your institution is doing. So let's talk a little bit then about the role of trustees. And my guess is Pamela will talk a little bit, I think is going to talk a little bit more about this too, but I'm going to start with maybe a fun fact. Every state requires that this individual has proper certification before serving the public. Who is this? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a hairstylist, which is always kind of astonishing to me because here I think we see very few states require training for college and university trustees. And these individuals are collectively the fiduciaries for more than $1.2 trillion in operating funds and endowments held by institutions nationwide. I mean, think about that. That's a phenomenal amount of money. It's really important that that, for example, you're undertaking what you're doing today, that you're keeping yourselves oriented and trained going forward. And this is maybe the kind of the truth behind that statement. Less than 10% of those trustees have any professional experience in higher education. You certainly don't need to have professional experience in higher education, but it is certainly helpful. And it's certainly, I think, again, what you're undertaking today to get yourselves, make sure you're up to speed and staying abreast of shifts and changes. It's part of your education, if you will, in higher education. But I think if you just sort of imagine a company board where such a small percentage of members really understood fully, right from the outset, core mission strategies and so on and so forth. It's a little stunning on a certain level to think about that. Ultimately, the ultimate responsibility for an institution rests with governing boards of trustees. And so there's an expectation that trustees understand both the role of the board and about higher education issues generally, and both those and maybe specifically the challenges facing their state and their campuses. And I think, right now, especially in this COVID era right now, I think, things are changing and shifting very rapidly. And so it's maybe more important than it ever is to be sure that you all are on top of those things. So what can you do? You can become a trustee who is college governance ready. So the most important thing is to understand the boundaries of that role. Certainly, hire, evaluate, and fire the chief executive officer. Those are 3 right out of the box. Approve and monitor the budget. It's very important that you are getting regular budget updates and that you are monitoring revenues and expenses. You also want to be monitoring and making sure that mission, and if you recall, we start with mission. That's the thing that's most important, but that your institution's goals and priorities and so on and so forth are all aligned with that mission. And of course, you serve as an ambassador for the institution in the community, which is, again, I'm sort of kind of hearkening back to the public meeting guidelines you have. I think that's one of the ways that you can be a good ambassador in the institution is to show that, in fact, you are following all of the laws that you're required to follow as a trustee. Day-to-day management of the institution should be delegated to the chief executive officer. So this is, admission decisions, investment allegations, excuse me, business contracts, and personnel matters, of course. And you delegate the authority to the chief executive officer, and that chief executive officer will then delegate on down the line. So when I was at an institution, I was a vice president for academic affairs, and I received my authority, associate vice president rather, I received my authority from the vice president, who received her authority from the president. So again, there's a delegation of authority down the line. So then ultimately, where does the power of that board of trustees reside? It does not lie with individual board members, but instead with the collective consensus. Again, think about, I think that open meeting law stuff is actually really powerful, maybe here specifically, because I think the intent there is really to help you understand that when you move toward having something close to a quorum, it looks like you are having collective consensus without the rest of the board along. And so it's really important to understand that as an individual, you really are powerless. You really have no authority to do anything for the institution. It's really when all five of you put your superpowers together, that's when you can make some stuff happen. So how can you be most effective? Monitor and assure the alignment of mission goals, priorities, resource acquisition and allocation strategies, and results. Most effective board members bring well-informed questions to meetings or ask beforehand. And again, there you want to be very careful, again, given open meeting laws, because you have read and thought about the materials in advance. I think it's best to probably bring those to the meetings. You should ask questions. You should expect answers. And it is the role of the board chair to make sure that there's good, strong discussions about anything that is brought in front of the board, if there's alternatives, and of course, making sure that everyone understands the implications of whatever is being brought in front of the board before calling for a vote. And so as board members, you need to do your work in partnership with the president and in that culture of shared governance involving the faculty. And this really requires trust, and that trust requires full, transparent, and open communication between all of you. You must follow your own policies and procedures. And why? All to help foster academic excellence and student success. You know, in some ways, I think it can be hard to maybe see why a decision you're making about some small thing at the board level is necessarily going to affect how a student is performing in class. But ultimately, all the decisions you make are going to trickle down to that student relative to resources that you're providing for that student, how that student is being admitted or supported through various programs. So you have a very, very important role for student success. And I think it's helpful to sort of think and be thoughtful about that as you are moving through your board meetings and thinking about your decisions. There are a number of educational and professional development opportunities for you in addition to these sorts of things. Association of Community College Trustees, a great organization, or Association of Governing Boards, another good organization. I think AGB publishes Trusteeship Magazine. If you're looking for a subscription, that might be the one. But Chronicle of Higher Education is certainly one way for you to stay current on everything. And if you're not sure you want to spend the money for an annual subscription to the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Education, Inside Higher Ed is a free daily newsletter. And you can go to, I believe it's insidehighered.com, and sign up to get an email from them every day. And there's, and there are articles big and small that I think really can help you get a feel for what's happening out there in higher ed. I'll also add here about Inside Higher Ed. I think, as we are undergoing an apparent transition to a new administration at the federal level, I mean, there's going to be changes in the Department of Ed. And so I really recommend that you are tracking with all of that. There's always training in board effectiveness and management, budgets, curriculum, academic freedom, and accreditation. So again, I think all of these things are topics of conversation you may pursue going forward. Questions? Maybe I'll bounce us back out here to
Are there questions from any of the board members? Anyone?
Hello.
Did somebody was
I'm trying to end the show and stop sharing my screen here. Did I stop sharing the screen? It's weirdly hard to tell sometimes.
I think it is still sharing.
Am I still sharing? Okay, let me see here.
I think the green button is
The green
in the lower band.
stop share. There we go. Okay.
So could you tell us a little bit, there's been a lot of discussion, I think, across the board about shared governance, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And before we do, and maybe Dr. Moses, you could provide a little bit of insight into the history of our organization, because we've had some issues with the Higher Learning Commission in the past. I believe the college has twice been put on sanction, and in part because of actions of the board. So I think it might be worth just sort of looking at sort of the history. I mean, I don't want to belabor the past, but I think it is worth sort of just touching base on things that have happened that have resulted in significant consequences for the institution, and then sort of maybe talking a little bit about shared governance. So I'm not sure who's the best.
Chairman Klinko, yes. So if you kind of look at, as you mentioned, the history of Pima Community College, dating back to basically 1980, 1981, there's always been kind of a through line of the board of Pima Community College understanding what their role, as Linnea just pointed out, what is the role of the board? What is the role of the board in regards to shared governance? Having proper, as Linnea pointed out, board policies, procedures, bylaws, being oriented and trained. That has been something that both times the institution has been put on sanctions with the HOC has been a through line in the documentation and feedback from the peer review team. When I started the college in 2015, and the college was on probation with the Higher Learning Commission, that is one of the things that the board was going through. At that point in time, there was a transition in the board of members, and the chancellor, would emphasize very heavily the importance of board orientation, board training, understanding their role when it came to accreditation, because he had looked at the same thing and seen that there was this common theme whenever the college was had issues with accreditation, that it did go back to the board's role and understanding their role and what they were responsible for and not responsible for, and the fact that one of the key things was that they delegate the authority of running the college to the chancellor in the administration of the college. So that's pretty much, that's been pointed out. There's been ongoing reports and documentation that has had to go to the HOC over time. And, each time we've had turnover in the board, we've done some type of training like this in regards to, I think this is the second or third time we've had Linnea out. We've had ACCT out multiple times as well. Pam, I think this is at least my second time interacting with you. And I know it's been, you or somebody from your organization has been out. So I think it's very important that each time we bring on a new board member, and then ongoingly with current board members, that we engage in this type of professional development opportunities because of our history.
So could you talk a little bit about sort of how the Higher Learning Commission sees shared governance and what that really looks like and how it manifests within the institution, and more, I think, significantly, the board's role in shared governance?
I mean, I think it can, in some ways, be frankly summed up by the phrase "stay in your lane." I mean, I kind of oversimplify things. I see Pam is nodding, but I think that's fundamentally true. Again, the board is a really important part of any institution, and yeah, I mean, Pima has had some difficulties, I think, in the past around this. And so I want to really applaud you for, in many respects, really being proactive, really working to understand what your role is, what the limits of your role, what your role is. But I think, you know, if you're, and I suppose as a public member, people know you, it probably wouldn't be completely unusual, I suppose, for your neighbor to say, hey, I know you're on the board there. Can you, you know, I'd really like my kid to get into this special program. You know, maybe they've emailed you. I mean, that's not your place. I think you could certainly put them in touch with Chancellor Lambert, and he can then delegate down the line to potentially look into something like that if that's the case. But again, it's about staying in your lane. You are not, in some ways, it's about not trading your influence on the board for things like that. You have a higher purpose, a higher calling on the board, and you need to be acting collectively with your board colleagues to make things happen. And so, you know, it can be, I'm sure it can be probably difficult sometimes when those conversations happen, but you got to be willing to say no. I mean, that's sort of the other thing. I think you have to be willing to say no.
Damien?
I'm
I can't
sorry,
hear you.
Dr. Hay, and then Ms. Garcia looks like she also put her hand up. I can see
Thank you.
everybody now, so.
Hi, Linnea. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Yeah.
And hi, Kat. Nice to meet you virtually. I can't wait to see you in person. So I've always kind of approached the board as we have one employee, and that's the chancellor.
Mm-hmm.
But also the other side is oftentimes, you know, if faculty or anybody email us with a grievance, it's important, I think, you know, and remind me if I'm getting this wrong, to remember that we also have to adjudicate any disagreements between the administration and employees. And so it's important that we not get inserted or insert ourselves into disagreements with employees of the college, and make sure any questions or concerns are deferred to Lee, Chancellor Lambert, and council as needed. But would you agree with that?
I absolutely would agree with that. Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Garcia?
My question has to do with, you know, I understand the role about the chancellor being, you know, the leader and in charge. But what do you do, or how can you help if you don't trust that leadership? And the reason that I'm saying that is because, you know, I'm going to just say it. This is this is an open meeting, and you know, you have people that come in and tell you that there's some unethical things going on with purchasing policies that are going on the board. I mean, that the chancellor is doing. The facilities director wasn't involved. The finance and only the chancellor were involved. They're talking and having 400 emails out there discussing issues that we're not aware of. Okay, and so to me, coming, you know, from, in my view, that's just not ethical. So how can you trust that? I'm sorry, I can't. And as a board member, I believe that those things should be brought forward. How do you do that without being chastised that you're not participating, that you're not doing shared governance?
I mean, have you done a delegation of authority to the chancellor?
What do you mean a dotted?
Well, I mean, you've hired. Have you all hired the chancellor?
Yes.
Have you evaluated the chancellor?
Yes, we have. There's a majority, right? So just because you feel or I feel that things are going right, I'm just one vote. And the other people don't see it that way. As a matter of fact, I get chastised in our governing board meetings for asking any questions, which I believe are pertinent. All I wanted was the answer, and then it's misdirected. I asked for an investigation to something, they go and put something else in. I might as well say it.
I have no idea what this particular, Pam, you're trying to say something looks like. Are you?
Well, I just think it's we have to be very careful what we're talking about, because we are in an open session. And at the same time, I really respect, Maria, what you're saying in terms of not wanting to ignore the elephant in the room. So I think we have to be careful because we're right on the edge of a personnel kind of discussion.
Indeed.
So if we take just one step back, but still try to answer your question, and it sounds a bit trite because it's always the answer, there's got to be more communication. And when there is a problem, that needs to be conveyed to the appropriate people. And that process really should be kind of spelled out in your policies. For example, there could be allegations made against each other, you know, as
Yes.
fellow governing board members. You could have the same problem. And given the open meeting laws, those are even harder to discuss. At least if you are having an issue that you are concerned about with your chancellor, you have the option of approaching your board chair and requesting an opportunity to have a discussion in executive session. There's nothing that says that you cannot conduct an evaluation. And Jeff, I don't want to step on your toes, so you help me with this. But I know CEOs that do that quarterly, just because they want to be able to talk about what is they're doing, what's not working, how does the board feel about it. I'm not ignoring the things we heard earlier in this session, but it's that kind of a setting that allows you to learn more about the situation, to talk about it more, to acquire more information. One of the main cautions, and I think Linnea would agree with this, is that you just have to be careful about what people come to you with. You have to be really careful about assuming it's true. But if it's troubling enough that you, if nothing else, you want assurance it's not true, then you still have to bring it forward and find the right place to be able to talk about it. And there has to be, sometimes things like that can happen. It can be just between a board member and their leader. And that's all it really takes, because it needs some accurate information. Sometimes it's much more complicated than that. And it might be the chair and a board member, or the chair, board member, and the chancellor. I'm still staying legal here. Jeff will jump in if I'm not, you know. So, I mean, there are ways of doing that. And then if there's a serious concern, and of course, part we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is you all have to function as a team of 6. And if something is getting in the way of functioning as a team of 6, and I hate to use this particular analogy, but maybe because I'm dealing with some serious cancer and a couple of family members right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm just going to say, it will be like a cancer. It will grow if you all don't find a way and a place and a time to talk about whatever it is that is troubling people. And Linnea's seen this more than I have, I'm sure, with all the accreditation. No board that operates without trust or with perpetual factions or sides are ever going to do justice to their college. They're just not, because it's going to get in the way. Because if you have reservations about a particular action or even a couple of actions, and you're troubled by it, and you're not getting to answer your questions, then you may find yourself not trusting a whole lot of other things too, which are not a problem, you know? So, I mean, that's what I mean about it growing, and ignoring it doesn't help. But you've got to find a way to talk about it, and you got to remember that, yeah, you 5 of you are the jury, but don't jump in yet. You know, don't come to a conclusion until you've heard more. Meredith wants to jump in.
Chairman Klinko, Pam,
Yes,
if I can just step back again one step further and address Maria, you're more in a hypothetical
Right.
perspective. It's my understanding, though, if there is ever, if you're on a different, let's pretend like we're on a different board in a different universe, and you have a CEO that there actually is a trust issue between a board member and a CEO or whatever. I mean, board members certainly have the right to ask for audits, external reviews of issues through the chair. They can't, we as independent board members can't do these things independently, but I think, if I understand it, Maria, we have, as board members, we collectively have other tools to help make sure that the facts are the facts and not what they call in Washington alternative facts. And so we have tools that we can use and ask the chair to use externally to investigate things that we think need further clarification. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I would agree with that because again, I think that's a collective consensual action.
Yes.
That your board can take. Again, as an individual, you really have no power as an individual. Your power is as a board collectively. Yeah, we would never say, don't ask questions. We would never, but again, I think you have to work through the process as established for your board.
Mr. Hanna?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Klinko. So first, Linnea, thank you. Thank you for being here. This is sort of the end of my term on the board. I can't tell you how much personally you've helped me in terms of understanding the Higher Learning Commission and what we were striving for, and through our whole troublesome time that we were able to turn things around thanks to people like you who gave us insight into what exactly we were striving to get to. So thank you. I think the most important thing you said, at least what I heard, was that everything trickles down to the students. And again, I can't say this enough. For me, our most important responsibility is to the students. Now, that's not to say that if we think something is unethical or illegal, God forbid, illegal going on, that it's our responsibility to pursue that. But when we get caught up in what I believe to be arcane or maybe bad decisions, but nothing illegal or unethical, I don't understand how that helps the students. That's my concern, is when we get focused in on something that, yeah, maybe it shouldn't have gone that way, but it doesn't really appear to be illegal. And it's really, as far as ethics, in my opinion, I don't see it, but could be, but nevertheless, how does that affect the student? And that's what concerns me.
I thought one thing, Linnea, that you used a word that is probably not in Pima's policies as much as it should be. I'm having reread them all again this weekend, and that's the word conduct. There's a code of ethics, and it's very, I was going to share this later, but it's appropriate, I think now. It's very high level, and it's good. There's nothing wrong. It's actually very well written. But it's about the board and how they make decisions, to your point, Mark, and putting students first, represent all the constituents. There's not only, and it's conflict of interest. And then there's a tiny portion about communication protocols, which is more related to our discussion about what do you do when people bring you complaints and to where do you refer them. There's a little piece of that. What is missing, and I'm sorry to surprise Lee on this, as much as we've all met together, we've always had too many things to say, and I've never brought this one up. What is missing, and that I see happening in some board policies now, is what I call recourse. Here's the code of ethics, and then some are even going a step further and having a code of conduct, which says, okay, here's how the board behaves, but guess what? Here's how individual members are supposed to behave or expected to behave. And it would include the chancellor or president as well. And then the recourse is, and when we think maybe that's not happening, what do we do? And it's spelled out there right there in your own policies and procedures that says, here's how we address those allegations. Here's how we do it, assuming people are innocent till proven otherwise. Here's how we do it in a fair way. And as a board, here's how we do it in a way that doesn't end up hurting the whole college and students at the same time because of an individual board's member. And that could be any of the 6 of you. We have ways for dealing with all of that for our employees, but not so much for each other or for our leader.
Okay.
And so, I mean, that's that might be one of those things that could show up on your to-do list as we talk toward the end of this time of what do you want to do next? How could we pursue that? Because what I'm going back to starting with Maria's question, if you have a concern, you have a right to bring it up. We need to find the best way to bring it up, the best way that not only gets you an answer, but does not hurt the college and the students in the process. And I suppose it would be fair to say not to hurt the individual as well. But I'm going to an even higher level. And it's tricky. I'm just going to say it. It's tricky, but you got to find a way, and there is a way. And fortunately, there's a way that works better if you're talking about your chancellor than it does for talking about each other, because you never get to go into executive session to talk about each other. Okay. At least I hope you're not doing, I know you're not doing that. That said, and it's harder with a small board like yours because of the same thing Danny was talking about, only 5 people, because larger boards, 7 and 9, they have lots more flexibility of ways of addressing concerns about each other's behavior and possible unethical behavior without violating quorums and all kinds of other things. But you don't have too much flexibility, but you do have some. But the real point is your policies and procedures don't say anything about that. And when they don't say anything, and I think Jeff maybe.
So I was going to say, so if I might, they do in a general way. So under the bylaws, if someone has a concern that the chancellor or a board member were acting inappropriately, and there is a code of conduct for board members and for employees, then under the current bylaws, the next step would be to go to the board chair and or legal counsel, which would result in a conversation about what's the appropriate next steps to take given whatever the specific concern was. We don't have mapped out what those alternative pathways would look like in the code of conduct, right, for an employee for disciplinary matter, there's very clear steps. We don't have those kind of steps mapped out, but there is sort of a notice and a general, then we'll figure out what would be the appropriate steps to take.
So Jeff, is there a code of conduct? I thought I heard you say we have a code of conduct for employees and board members. They're lumped together?
No. So the employee handbook has a code of conduct.
Okay, I couldn't find your code of conduct in the policies you sent me. So maybe I just missed it.
In the bylaws, there is an article that has conduct for board members. So I can.
Okay. Well, maybe it's there. I think that maybe that's where the one about communications protocols are. I think that's the one I was talking about at the very end.
Because it's not worth periodically looking at it. I mean, the board, we went through a fairly significant revision process a while ago, so we could certainly do that again. But I mean, there is a basic process.
Okay. Well, that's again. I don't want to. I will get you back on track. But the point is, this wasn't clear to Maria here. What is a way to handle her concern? And I'm sensing from the group, and knowing we're in a public setting, I'm sensing from the group that some people didn't care for the way it was handled. And so that said, all of that works against you as a team in terms of trying to resolve the issue.
So Dr. Fisher, maybe can I ask a couple clarifying questions to both you and Dr. Stenson? A series of sort of circumstances occurred where I believe board members, were notified of some sort of external concern, and then rather than following or contacting legal counsel, there was sort of a request for all of this different types of information to sort of conduct an investigation, for a better word. So this was like all this collection with public records requests sent by board members asking for information so that it could be evaluated at some level. After this sort of went on and it became clearer what the concern was, the board, and through me, we directed our legal counsel to hire outside legal counsel to conduct an investigation into these concerns, specifically to address them in a clear and open way so that there would be no misunderstanding. There was also, one of the reasons that we're having this discussion about open meeting is there was a lot of communications moving around, and there was concern. I certainly had concerns that we were on the edge around open meeting issues as well. We conducted those investigations, and those investigations, which we had a special meeting to discuss and to present to the public, and they're available on the website. They found no wrongdoing. It was, the chancellor was within his authority that we had delegated to him. There was no unethical, no illegal activity that had gone on. And then, we sort of closed that door, but now we seem to be sort of still revisiting those things, and we're still pulling up this sort of concept of wrongdoing. And so I'm concerned, one, that there is a perception that there is any wrongdoing going on. I mean, I think I have said continually during my tenure on this board, I believe in transparency, clarity, and let's get an outside assessment. Let's do an audit. Let's find out what's going on, because all of the problems that this institution has had in the past is because a lack of clarity, a lack of commitment, openness to the public.
Yeah.
And so, the faster that we can conduct an assessment, an evaluation by a independent third party who's not, doesn't have any, isn't beholden to anybody within the system, seems like the strategy to approach when there are concerns about wrongdoing. But there seems to be a disconnect with the conclusion of that and moving on, and whether or not someone feels like the resolution actually fit a perception of what was going on. And so I think what would be helpful as part of our discussion today would be to discuss strategies. How do we work together to effectively identify a concern, take an appropriate approach in evaluating whether there is something to be concerned about? If there is, moving together as a board to put in place solutions to stop it from happening, or to correct it, or to terminate individuals, or whatever we need to do as a board to hold accountability within the system. But if there's not, we also have to move on, and we have to work together, and we have to trust each other. And there seems to be a breakdown in that space.
Well, Damien, that's why I brought up process. So it's not just whatever the particular issue of the day is, but anytime there's an issue, so that there is agreement. I don't know a whole lot about this. So again, I'm talking theoretical model, but practical. And that is that where is it spelled out what we need to do, notwithstanding what Jeff said, because I just looked again and I still can't find it in bylaws. So if it's out, I'm just saying it obviously was not easy to find. And I know for sure that whether it's in there or not, what should be in there in terms of best practices is, Maria, if you have a concern, if anybody has a concern, you take it to the appropriate person. In this case, the chair. If it's about something else, it may be take it to the chancellor, but it should be spelled out. Meredith made a super good point earlier, and that was never should you be investigating it yourself. Never. Because in fact, you're going to end up adjudicating it later, or you could. Now I'm thinking like when somebody grabs you in the grocery store and tells you about this awful thing their dean did, and you're a kind and nice person, so you nod your head and you smile, and then you don't even say yeah, or you might be so shocked that you say, oh, that's awful. How did that, I'm really sorry to hear that. And of course, what you heard may not be true at all. And then it may go through the whole process and eventually end up in front of the board for the last final jury call, or judge call, I should say. And the employee says, well, I saw Maria in the grocery store, 4 months ago, and she really agreed with me, and, et cetera. You didn't, but believe me, they will say that if they saw you nodding. And you put yourself in it. Now you can't run from them when you see them in the grocery store, but you do have to be super careful and withdraw from the conversation and turn it over to who is appropriate. In this case, whether it's your board chair or your chancellor, depending on the issue. Let them investigate it. You mentioned having an agree as a board on what's the process. We all agree, because remember, you can't go tell the chancellor to have an investigation. You can't tell Damien to go have an investigation. You have to agree as a board, at least a consensus, although I'd sure hate to do it on a 3-2 vote or a 4-1 vote, but you have to agree as a board, yes, we need to take care of this and clear the air. You agree how you're going to do it, who's going to do it, you let them do it, they come back, they share it. And if you don't totally agree with the outcome, you at least then have to, and that's the word that was going through my mind as you were speaking, Damien, was you have to process it. And you may have to come away eventually saying, well, they didn't see it the way I did, but I think the process was fair. And then in the meantime, what's happening, and this could be between two board members as much as between a board member and the CEO, is it hurts the relationship. It clearly hurts the trust. You already said that. It hurts the trust. And that's why I'm a believer in moving forward. And we've got some people on this board who are type A, move forward. Do we really have to talk about this anymore? I'm watching some of you laugh. That said, you got to take time for the process and work it through so that everybody feels they've been heard. Even if you're not thrilled with the outcome at the end, you know your voice has been heard. Because if you try to pretend it doesn't exist, that's why I like the elephant in the room analogy a lot. If you try to pretend it doesn't exist, it's going to get in the way of every other conversation you all are having. And then we're back to the basic principle that Linnea talked about. No one person has authority. So no matter how much you may distrust or dislike somebody, you don't get to make the decision about their future. But what you do may end up doing, if we're not careful, is really hurting the college in the process. And I know none of you want to do that. I know you know how valuable Pima is to the community. So you got to find a time to address it. And may I give you all just a little bit of grace? It's not a word I use very often, but I've heard it a lot lately, and I think there's something to this. COVID is making these kinds of discussions harder than ever. Boards are not getting to meet in person. They're not being able to look face to face, looking somebody's eyes and figure out, do I trust you? Do I accept your apology as sincere? What about this? What about that? I've been with 4 different boards in the last 5 weeks, 2 of them in person. And the 2 that were in person, who was their first time together in whatever it's been, 6, 7, 8 months, all this stuff came out. All this stuff that people had concerns about over the past few months, and they really hadn't had a place where they could talk about it and put it to bed. And so I think in a way, we all have to be a little bit more tolerant. That doesn't mean you should ever accept anything that you think is unethical or illegal. I don't mean that. But the lack of opportunity to process it and move on has been made much more difficult. And I don't have any answer for you on how to deal with that other than what you're doing right now. So I commend you for what you're doing right now. And I would encourage to perhaps consider ways, not violating any laws, that 1 or 2 of you could meet together with your chair, I mean, whatever the configuration that's the most effective, to pursue it further in terms of, for example, if I don't trust somebody, I'm not thinking of you guys, I'm thinking of a group I was with 2 weeks ago. And what we got them to agree to do was that the 2 people were going to meet privately themselves and talk about why this hurt was still there after such a long period of time. And they agreed to go and talk non-quorum, off the record. And I think that was a great step. And it's part of being part of a corporate entity, if you will. I don't like that adjective, but that's what a lot of statutes say. You are a corporate entity. So you can't do it over here as a group of 6, but you sure as heck can do some over here of just 2 people. And so I don't know how relevant that is to this particular situation, but I would encourage, I'm not picking on you, I'm identifying you, Maria, because I appreciate your willingness to speak up, and I'm really glad you did. But if that's something you're willing to do and have an offline conversation with 1 other person or 1 person plus whatever it takes, I'd really encourage you to do that. It is your role to ask the questions, but I will come back to process. If you had a process in place already that said, or maybe you have one and you just need to get better acquainted with it, I don't know. But it should be real specific. I come back to the word conduct. It should be real specific. This is how you do it. This is where you take it. This is the next step. And at the end, we all agree to honor the decision of that fair process. That's all I know to do with it. I don't know if that helps your initial question or not.
Thank you. It helps.
Let's say here to that, because I think, we're going to be looking at process. Did the board follow its own processes, and did they resolve it in the way that they have outlined in their bylaws or whatever the whatever the place is where how you deal with things are laid out. And ultimately, yeah, at some point you may have to just say, okay, this didn't resolve the way I thought it would, but I'm more interested in the good of the organization than in, trying to continue to push this. We did, I mean, I think, Damon, you said, we did the investigation, we've done this, we've done that, we found this, and now we're going to move forward. And if that was the process and that's what the finding was, great, then move forward. If there was some other finding, then you should pursue that. But I think you have to, from my perspective, and I mean, I've got a couple of boards who right now, one institution in particular is on a sanction right now because the board is that dysfunctional. And some of that really is just decisions are made and people aren't happy with them. And there's sort of a lot of mussing and fussing.
Yeah, it doesn't go away.
Yeah, that doesn't go away, and that's, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it trickles down. It trickles down to the student.
Well, yeah, it makes it extremely uncomfortable to function this way. But I just feel that the item that I wanted to be looked at wasn't looked at. It was circumvented to something else. And I'll just leave it at that because I think we need to not go on any further with this.
Okay, but that's a legitimate concern. And that's that processing or debriefing I was talking about. If that's how you felt when it was done, then the next thing would be to share with your colleagues, here's what I felt got missed. Here's how
I did that.
Okay.
That I put it in writing.
Okay. And there's another question I like to ask when something like this happens, because sooner or later you got to look forward, not backward. But before you do that, it's often helpful to ask the question, what could have happened differently, not just on your part, but on the other person's part, that might have prevented this? What would we do differently? And I'm saying, as myself as a CEO, I might very well say I was perfectly within my rights, but knowing now how you feel about X in general, what could I have done differently that would have made you feel better? And if your answer to me has the consensus of the rest of the board, like, yeah, maybe just a heads up a little sooner, or whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it is.
And then you go on and you go from there. And then it's a little easier to let it go. And it might be just the opposite. And you might say, oh, I missed that when you sent this out 6 months ago and your packet was so thick and I missed it. I mean, let's face it, that happens to all of us too. And so together you come up with, okay, here's how we might avoid this in the future. It makes it a little easier to let it go. But again, I think it's good that it was brought up, and you might want to take a look, as a demon, you might want to just take a look at those policies, process that you have in place for that, and see what you think. Not about that issue, but about conflicts or allegations in general. Usually their problem ones are between board members, I'm going to tell you. That far more so, because you have an out with your chancellor. You do an evaluation and you can go into executive session and talk about pretty much whatever you want. The more challenging one is when one of you do something that other people feel violates your policy, and it may be like nothing's ever real clear, but almost real clear that that's the case. But what do you do about it? How are you supposed to handle it? And too many boards that I've worked with try to write that policy while they're very upset with one of their colleagues. That doesn't usually go over very well because everybody knows that's why they're doing it. So anyway, Linnea and our comments clearly, I wanted to thank you, Linnea. You stole half of my presentation, but that is just perfectly fine because it's always reassuring to know that the expert up there agrees with that. But I do have some others I'll share when we get to it.
Yeah, so Dr. Fisher, Dr. Sinton, so I mean, I think this is a good time to address elephants in the room. And I think there are others that should be talked about in the context of this conversation today. And one is something you brought up earlier, this idea of undue influence. And something that I have observed in the functioning of this board is it's almost as if we have ghost board members, people who are producing documentation that is being submitted under names that is being sent to both me, to the chancellor, that isn't actually being generated from board members serving on this board. It's third parties who are providing, either with input or completely outside, I don't know, information is coming, and it's coming under people's names. And so it's something that for me is become very difficult to navigate, because I'm not sure who I'm talking to. I'm not sure what the issue, where the issues are emanating from. And so it's become complicated. I think it's added an extra layer of complication. And I wonder if you could just talk about undue influence and about the role of board members to really serve. I mean, I think, I am elected by the public, right? I hear a lot of opinions from people on a lot of different things. I take all of that in and then I make a decision. But maybe you could provide a little more insight into the role of board members individually to be independent, or if that's, you sort of alluded to it earlier, but maybe talk a little bit more about that. Or,
well, I mean, the thought is that, again, if you're governing for the good of the institution, you really should not be necessarily influenced by outside forces, right? I mean, yes, you're gonna be reading Inside Higher Ed. You're educating yourself. You're taking in information. Sure, somebody stops you at the grocery store. Seems to be a place where a lot of people go there. As near as I could tell, and in your town, you're at the grocery store and someone says something to you. You can acknowledge that and so on. But I mean, I think really ultimately, there should not be some other group that is somehow producing something for you that you're then sending into the board under your own name. I don't even understand that, how that would happen. I can't even think what a group of peer reviewers would think about that. I'm not sure. I don't. There's no there's no. I don't think we'd have any expectation that that's something that would happen. You should be governing for the good of the institution, not because someone is telling you how to do it.
A way of maybe looking at it, because I agree with you, Linnea, it's I've seen it happen. There can be a special interest group in the community who has an agenda, and especially if they helped elect somebody, and then they feel like that person is supposed to carry forward their agenda, which I know you'll say is absolutely taboo as far as accreditation is concerned. You represent the whole group. And as I always tell people, even if you're elected by geographical region, once you're elected, you represent the whole institution and the whole constituencies. But a slightly different twist on that maybe is a little easier to get our hands on would be a group of employees. Because groups of employees who have, I mean, let's face it, we all know that. And I was, you don't know this, Catherine, but I was a faculty member for many years and a union officer and a Senate president. So I'm a lifelong union member. So I'm not anti-union or any of that kind of stuff. At that said, their agenda might be different than the boards in terms of the whole institution, or they might not even be a formal group. They might just be a group of faculty that have an agenda. And if they think that they can go to any one of you and get you to, in essence, be their spokesperson to carry their message forward, you've already gotten way out of your lane. If they have a concern, they need to bring it to the whole board. And the whole board needs to see it, because again, you're back in that jury and judge role of how accurate is this, and you may ask a lot of questions, and you can hold your chancellor's feet to the fire, but it's all open and above board.
And I hate to interrupt, but it looks like we lost Ms. Garcia, so maybe we should just make a pause for a moment until she's coming back on.
We see if we lost her. Oh yeah, you're probably right. Do you want to take a quick break for 5 minutes? I was going to suggest that anyway.
That's a great idea.
Some of us are getting our own, but
we'll take a 5 minute. We'll take a 5 minute break. So we'll reconvene at 3:17 or 3:18.
Great.
Okay, great. Andrea, it looks as if Ms. Garcia is still not logged back on. Is there any way that you could give her a call? Andrea?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I can't start my video, but it says the host stopped it. So maybe Andrea turned us all off. That's the message I keep getting.
I see most of everybody.
Ah, now it's starting to come back. Okay, let's try again. Okay, she decided I could come back. I didn't act that badly. Okay.
Andrea, are you there?
This is always the problem with taking a break. You lose some, and you can't run down the hall and grab them.
So Linnea, have you heard anything about Biden's choice for education secretary?
I have not.
Me neither. So.
We are all watching and waiting.
Exactly.
Should be, should be interesting. I think, right now we're mostly dealing with, there were a number of changes to the substantive change policies that came into effect July 1, and we're right now grappling with, quite honestly, what is going to be an excessive amount of work that our institutions are going to have to do and report to us.
Yeah.
And all I can say is, when asked why, because the department wants us to. There's absolutely no good reason for it, quite honestly.
Oh, geez.
It's really terrible. I really feel for our institutions on this. I mean, I feel for us because we're gonna have to gather this information, right?
And then do something with it, I guess.
I'm not even sure what we don't even have to respond. I mean, I think they have to tell us, notify us within 30 days. For example, let's say Pima decides they want to put a particular program online, even though they have a completely, I think Pima has I would call it the full meal deal. They can offer, up to this point, they've been able to offer any approved program in any modality. And maybe they've had a face-to-face program. Now, after July 1st, if they decide they're going to put this face-to-face program online, again, the COVID stuff aside, which has complicated things, in a whole messy way.
So,
they have to tell us, they have to notify us that they're doing that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Within 30 days of doing it. And then maybe 3 months later, they say, well, actually, we don't want to do that. They have to notify us that they're taking it offline.
Right. And it changes depending upon the level of virus in the community. Month to month.
So, I mean, it's just going to be, Bruce and I will probably be spending a lot more time together in the coming days over this stuff.
So I hate to interrupt. It looks like everybody's back. Is Lee or Chancellor Lambert, are you back? We are still live streaming. Okay, it looks like Chancellor Lambert's back. Yeah. So, we still have about an hour and 40 minutes together, and I want to make sure that we use our time as effectively as possible. So I want to hand it over to Dr. Fisher to help guide the next sort of components.
Okay, just for clarity, how much time did you say we had left?
We are until 5 o'clock, right? Is that so we have about an hour.
I thought you posted it as 4 o'clock. That's why. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying, because I'm on Central Time, so I thought it was 5 Central. So if you're saying 5 your time, that makes 6 or 7.
I'm looking at Catherine too. She looks like she thought that too. I'm fine.
It's been posted till 5 o'clock.
We posted till 5 o'clock.
Till 5.
Okay, great.
Till 5.
You all, it's your retreat. It's your workshop. You'll decide when you've had enough, and we'll just try to make it be as valuable for you as we can. Do we think Maria is back with us?
It looks like she is. Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Garcia, are you back? Or did we lose you again? Ms. Garcia? Maybe we can give her another minute.
Yeah, because I think we wanted her to, I wanted to finish that one thought about employee groups.
Ms. Garcia, are you there?
Yay.
Terrific.
There she is. Okay. Well, before we lost you earlier and then we decided to take a break, Maria, we were talking about some other things of people, the undue influence idea, but more it's just a matter of how you handle those situations. And even in our discussion today, we're doing as we usually do in our retreats, jumping all around the agenda, and that's perfectly fine because we should talk about something when it's relevant. But this whole issue of communication protocols is a big part of, and I think really important for Catherine in particular, a big part of board conduct. And it sometimes crosses over from conduct to ethical behavior and definitely influences the institution as a whole. But what do we do when individuals come to us, and they will come to you, Catherine, I promise you, with their concerns or their complaints, and your board has a pretty good outline at the very end of your Code of Ethics Conflict of Interest Policy, Article 10, that spells out, yes, if somebody brings it to you, you take it to the chair, or you take it to the chancellor, or it's about the chancellor, you take it to the chair. And the community members that come to you, obviously, well, they're all important, but the community members' response from you is a little different than employees, because you're going to be more, I don't want to say sympathetic, empathetic. You're going to listen. You're definitely going to listen. And then you're going to say, well, you know what? I can see what I can learn. Would you like me to have the chancellor call you, for example? Or we can look into that. Or would you prefer I get back to you? If you can, pass it off to Lee. Let him be the one that gets back to them, or he'd delegate if it's a person who knows that particular topic even better. But you listen politely and you follow up and you let him know. What is a tougher one, and that's what I was starting to talk about before we took the break, was employee groups, because the rules are different for the employees. Remember, I have this whole thing that I call the rules of one. It's kind of corny, but it's a way of remembering it for me. There's one team, and that's the 6 of you. No one person has any authority. The whole board needs to speak with one voice. After you've discussed and debated and argued, it's still one voice, and you have only one employee. So given that last one, you have only one employee. If employees brings concerns to you, your appropriate response is to turn it back and say, have you been to your dean? Have you been to your president, campus president? Have you been to the chancellor? You turn it back to them. The last thing you want to do is get involved in trying to solve it yourself for the reasons we talked about earlier. And then, of course, after you've been contacted, you're going to call the chancellor. Again, if it's not about him, you're going to call the chancellor and tell him what has happened. Now, a different part of that picture is when a group of faculty that are organized or semi-organized and really have a particular agenda they're pursuing. And usually they get real excited about a new new board member. By the way, across the country, Catherine, trustees is a more common term, but board of governors is also popular. And of course, that's where you are. So if I misspeak, it's the same thing. But if they see a new member come onto the board, it's like, oh, good, let's go talk with her. Let's go tell her how it really is. And depending on your relationship with them, perhaps a prior relationship before you're even on the board, there's a real tendency for some groups to want to take advantage of you. I'm just going to say it again, not ignore the elephant in the room. You're not going to stop your friendly relationships with people, but your relationship's different now. You're a trustee, you're a board member, and you have to be really cautious about how you respond. But if you're hearing from a group of people enough concerns about a topic, you're going to convey that to the powers that be, whoever that should be. And if you feel that it needs a broader audience, you may take your issue to your whole board and say, what about the subject of, how are we doing in that? What could we learn more? Maybe it's a complicated subject and you want to have a study session. But again, you take it back to the board, you reach a consensus that, yeah, yeah, and this is whether you're veterans, and I'll bug them because you don't have very many veterans left, so it's easy to pick on those two. They may be thinking, oh yeah, 2 years ago, we went through that in so much detail. Do we really have to do it again? The answer is yes. We at ACCT, we say one new board member equals a new board, and you have almost 3 new board members, one new, two sort of. So they may have to go back and revisit topics, and it's okay for you to bring it up and do that. What it's not okay is for you to take the issue that this particular group of people, whether they're in the community or on the campus, have convinced you as an issue, and now you speak for them. And that's why I think, yeah, Linnea, you're still with it. We keep moving on the screen and I can't find people. It's like, you're supposed to be over there. No, there you are. But as Linnea was saying, it was hard for her to even imagine. Never would board members put forward, never should they put forward ideas or concerns that are really those of some other group other than themselves. If they feel strongly about the topic, they can encourage those other people to put it forward. They can come to your open comments of your meeting and put it out there. And if enough board members feel like there is a rule because of open meeting laws, if they come forward and they put a lot of stuff out there, complaints, concerns, whatever. And Jeff, I don't know how strict you are about this, but technically you're not supposed to respond to those at that meeting. In other words, you're not supposed to get into a back and forth with people in public comments. You can listen attentively, and then you can talk to each other a little if you need to. And then you can also decide as a group, Mr. Chancellor, we'd like you to follow up and bring us back some more information next month or whatever. But you don't engage at that point. But they can bring it forward as their issue. No matter how sympathetic as you are, again, you're supposed to be listening and taking it all in, including the things that you don't know yet, and including the wisdom of your colleagues. And then you get to take an issue on it at the other end. So those communication protocols, and they're actually spelled out pretty well in in that section of your code of conduct at the end, or code of ethics, I mean, but it's really important to do. So if I could back up just a minute, I want to just say it again, because I think if you had to simplify everything, we can get it this way. You got to be a team. Don't have to always agree, just like family, but you got to be a team. You got to listen to each other. You got to operate as a team. And the less you operate as a team, the more you're going to hurt your college, all the way over to the really extreme of sanctions and worse. And of course, when I say hurt the college, I really mean hurt the students. No one of you has any authority. I hate telling a newly elected person that. And they often argue with me. Well, what do you mean? I just got elected. And I said, yes, you have 20% authority in your case, 20%. And it's not the same as being on a high school or a K-12 school board, not the same at all. They get way into operations. It's not the same at all as being on a city council or a county commission or whatever it might be called in your area, where you have your staff and your own office and your certain domain of authority, and you direct staff. Frankly, a lot of people who get elected to higher ed boards are kind of disappointed because they think they're going to be able to do all these certain things. You can still get those kind of things done, but only if you win over your colleagues. That's what I always say to people. It depends on how persuasive of a leader you are, and you can come in with new ideas. And I always encourage new board members, ask questions. You don't really have any old timers on your board, but some boards I go to, they've got people who've been there 15, 20, 25 years. And when the new person asks a question, they look at them like, what are you talking about? That's how we do it. Or they'll say, it's in policy. We'll say, show us. There is no policy on that. It's just how they've always done it, right? So I tell new people, ask questions. That's perfectly fine. And the old timers should be able to tell you why. But there has to be that, again, that team part in order to do that. What is really tough, and it relates back to our earlier conversation, is if you've had an honest, open, candid, transparent discussion about process about what the outcomes, and finally made a decision. And I think Linnea will back me on this. I think I saw it in her PowerPoint even. Once a decision made, it's honored by everybody. Now, you don't have to go out and promote it and say, now I love it, because they already know you don't. But I tell people, if you can't promote it, then just shut up. Just zip it. And the decision's been made. The press, if you have a vote and it's 4-1 and something passes, do you think the press is going to contact any of the 4? No, we're going to go directly to the 1 because that makes better news. And my opinion, the appropriate response to that kind of inquiry is, you already know why I voted against it. I shared that with my colleagues, but my colleagues have made a decision and I support the decision that they made. So it's some of those kinds of things that are the practical application of staying in your lane. Now, I have a couple of things I want to point out, mostly to Catherine. The rest of you tolerate this for a minute. I'm not going to walk you all through it, but you have some materials that Andrea sent to you ahead of time from ACCT. There's a summary about roles and responsibilities. It is totally consistent with what Linnea shared with you earlier, just goes into a little bit more detail about acting as a unit and supporting. It's, pardon? Okay, so something else. Okay, so I'm not going to walk you through that, but I would like you to look at the one that she sent out that's called the top 20 truths for effective trusteeship. Do y'all have that copy? And I know the veterans have seen this before. I'm going to wait and see if you have it, because whether you have it in front of you or not affects what I'm going to have you do. Everybody got one? Okay. Okay. This one page, Catherine, summarizes hundreds of pages. So if you're the kind that want a Cliff Note version, that's what we're trying to do on this one page about what does it take for effective trusteeship? What are the practices that a board or an individual on the board, because they vary, would actually do? And what I would like for you all to just take a moment and do is go through these 20. I'm not going to read them to you. Go through these and identify 2 things. A particular concept that in your experience, this is for the veterans, Catherine gets off easy. A particular concept on this page that you think is so very important, and your advice to a new board member would be watch for this one, or if it's 2, that's okay. Watch for this. And then the second thing I'd like you to look for, this has more to do with the elephants in the room. What is one on there that this board needs to work on because we're not doing too well? We could at least do a whole lot better. Okay, so
are we looking at the top 20 document, or which document are we looking at?
Top 20 document. Thank you, Meredith. Top 20 document. There's 20 items, 20 sentences. So one that you particularly like and think is important and you want to share that as advice, and then one that you think the board needs to work more on. Meredith, do you have a question?
Oh, sorry. No, sorry.
Okay. Okay. All right. Just take a few minutes, take a look at those. Or if you have to go back in your email and find them, go. Oh, we don't want you to disconnect though.
Well, Pamela, I would, one thing I think we do well, I think our board meetings have gotten much more effective and efficient.
Okay. And that was an issue for a while.
Yeah, we just got a message from Maria that she's unable to get back in. Did you see that, Damien? Probably the same video issue that Pam was having or something.
Yeah, I see that now.
Marcus maybe can help.
Or Andrea. And let's just pause until she gets back in.
I've tried calling her, but she's not answering. I'm still trying.
Well, she chatted here. I think it's Marcus maybe can help us.
Oh, I see. It was Marcos that turned off the video when we were trying to get back in earlier.
I was afraid it might capture something unintentionally.
Oh, aren't you kind? I like having somebody looking out for us like that. Maria, are you there now?
I can't see I can't go back to my email.
Okay.
I suggest she hang up and dial back in.
And the list of 20 is also on the board docs on the website. So if you go to the agenda, it's included in all the agenda material.
Great.
Ms. Garcia, do you want to sign out entirely and then try to log back in to the Zoom call?
I'm in the Zoom call. I just can't see the material.
So the material is in the is an attachment to all the agenda material. So if you go to the board docs, it's in the or you go to the governing board site. It's at the bottom of the agenda.
Damien, why don't you share your screen and you can just put it up. We can all see it.
Yeah. Can everybody see that?
Yeah. Great.
Perfect. So anyway, I think we do well and have made significant improvement on effective and efficient meetings.
Okay. Board meetings are your meetings. You're spending the time the way you want to spend it. Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion. Others may have something else.
Other veterans agree with her on that one? No disagreement. So Meredith, what do you think you could do better on that list? Not you, but the board.
I'm reading.
It's okay. You're just giving the others a chance to do their work too. So that's okay.
I think number 11
Okay.
is really, really important. And I think we're struggling with a little bit of that right now.
Yeah. I was wondering about that because it certainly fits with our discussion. He doesn't get a blank check. In general, however, any criticisms you might have of your leader, you'll want to deliver in private and hold their feet to the fire, but not in a way that makes it impossible for him to govern your institution. Somebody else. Mark, you're about to leave us. Share your wisdom. What do you think is on there that this board has done well the past year and maybe something they should work on?
I think that we've done well on broad policies.
Okay.
I think that's something that we struggled with early on when I first came on, doing a little micromanaging. And so I think we've done better in terms of working on broad policies. Stuff we need to work on. Yeah, number 11, I am concerned about number 11. I again worry that we see the big picture, and instead of undermining just moving forward, that we work on positive solutions to ensure that.
Okay. And that relates partly to number 14 as well, of what message are you conveying to the public if you don't do it that way. Luis, do you have a couple for us?
It would be the number.
Mr. Gonzalez, you've actually muted yourself. Mr. Gonzalez?
There you go. Yes.
Okay, I'll come back to number 14. I think in the 2 years, I think we have done a lot in reference to building that image. The good thing is that we only have one public community college in the southern Arizona within Pima County. I think that's very positive. I know there's always room for betterment, but I think we're on the good road right now.
Great.
And those are the good things that I've heard so far. And I do want to comment in reference to the not only the orientation, but what we're having today. This is in the 2 years, this is one of the best in reference to the intro. When I first came in, I thought I wish I was received more of this information back then not until right now. But I think it's doing good.
Good, thank you. So where are we? Maria, can you see it well enough to comment on the ones on here that catch you as either something you feel good about or something that needs to be improved? Not sure we have her.
I would say number 19 needs to be looked at from all board members.
Okay. Well, then you just made Linnea's day, but good. And is there something in there you think the board is doing well?
I think we do number 2 quite well.
Okay. Well, that's a huge one. So that's definitely one you want to work toward for sure. Catherine, did you attend board meetings before you were elected?
I did. I watched them on
Or
YouTube.
watched?
Yes.
Well, good. Because I'm just curious as an outsider watching if there was, and that's a little tougher, obviously, but as you look at this list, did you have any observations that kind of, caused you to pause or say, oh, why did they do that? Or that makes me feel uncomfortable or anything of that nature?
Not on this list. I mean, I'm
Okay.
in a learning mode. Most of all, I mean, going back to kind of the original question about an hour ago that David posed on shared governance, and then it just took off from there. I mean, and thank you for all of your warnings, duly noted. But it was my understanding, my very basic understanding, that the board is the umbrella for checks and balances. And and in fact, we are one entity. We're not individuals or anything like that. And I think, and any board is composed of individuals. So I do see a little bit of, I don't want to use the word, I hate it when people say this and then they use the word, right? I don't want to use the word dysfunction, but I use the word dysfunction. It's not dysfunction, but it could be if we don't all communicate. So that's why I'm excited to be part of this, to learn and communicate more, to avoid any kind of, dysfunctionality, I guess. I mean, being in the military, I know what it's like, and being a leader, to present yourself as the face of the school, because we might be, we don't all travel in fives in town.
Absolutely.
So, if I'm approached, I know, what to say and what not to say. And I think that's all common sense. And I think all of this whole session is awesome because it's about communications, and just the fact that we're here is a giant step towards communicating, which in turn turns into transparency. So, I guess I didn't answer your question, but I think that on this list, we're making this first step towards the betterment of, the 20 truths of effective trusteeships, is basically just talk to each other. And that's what I didn't understand. A couple of the YouTubes, I don't know the backstory. So I didn't understand why there was some disarray. Because I thought, well, don't they, and the open meeting answered that question, don't they talk to each other and plan? And that's why I asked about, can I get reading materials so that I'm not just, kind of cold cocked at a meeting, so I kind of know what's happening and I can do some research and understand. So that's all under communications. So thank you.
Well, your comments are great and very, very helpful. And I often feel like I need to apologize that I keep coming back to communication, but it's just that I agree with you so much. I haven't found something yet that we can't deal with eventually through communication if people are willing to do it and if they're willing to be open and candid about it. And something you said, and Louise, something you said earlier about new board member orientation, as we today, as we wrap up, one of the things that eventually we want to talk about is what do you want to do next in terms of board professional development? Because I'm hoping both that everything you've heard from all three of we outsiders today emphasize not only how important your role is, but how you can't be expected to know everything. And in order to make decisions, it's Lee's responsibility, and to a certain extent the chair's responsibility, to provide you with the opportunity to learn as much as you can. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do that, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But one of the ones that struck me as you were speaking, Catherine, was the issue of, some boards appoint mentors to the new board members. Just somebody who's willing to say, no, I'll be glad to fill you in. I'll give you the backstory. Not in a negative way, but just sometimes there's questions you want to ask. You don't want to ask them in front of everybody. You don't want to take their time. You might even be a little worried that they sound dumb. They aren't, but you might be worried about it. But having somebody that you can just quickly ask those questions to are really good. Whether it's a board, usually it's a fellow sister board member, but I'm looking at the screen and thinking, you ought to pick on Mark, and he's got time. He can tell you what that was about. But it really is important to have that relationship. Before I go to Demian and let him comment on his.
I have one.
Oh, go ahead. Are you back? Maria, are you ready?
Okay. Yes, I'm ready. The other thing that I think we need to work on is number 9. I don't think that's always been the case.
Oh, ooh, okay. Is it the staff part or the each other part?
The each other part.
Okay. And that's probably what Catherine was sensing as she watched your meetings.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of people wrote in and spoke up about that one.
Okay. I feel like I'm going to ask a question that is so obvious that you say, why would you bother? But I'm going to do it anyway. Do you all agree that number 9 is really important? I'm watching.
I do.
Yeah. Looks like I'm getting consensus on that. Okay. Linnea, how important is number 9? Are you still with us?
I am still with you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good. So number 9 is about respectfully treating one another.
Yes.
I've got kind of on 2 screens, and it's like really
it's
writing. So I'm kind of
board
squinting.
members always treat staff and each other respectfully in all public settings.
I think that's actually super important, and in some respects, not just staff and each other, but even actually guests you may bring. And I say that as someone who visited a board meeting and at another institution and was theoretically on my break, and then was cornered by 2 board members and given a tongue lashing about something I had said, and which was So yeah, it's good practice all the way around, and I will tell you that I did not walk away from that feeling very good about where that board was at.
No, of course not.
And the peer review that followed that visit basically confirmed my feeling that things were not going well on that board.
Yeah, and isn't that a good point, that it is like symptomatic of whatever else is going on?
Yeah.
And the fact that the culture of the board made it okay to do that.
Right.
The whole issue of civility and all of that. So that's really important. Something else that Catherine said earlier, I wanted to jump in and it wasn't appropriate. So I want to make sure I would like to add to the comments that were made earlier today about shared governance, because that pops up a lot. Well, it pops up a lot everywhere, but especially at Pima. And I can just tell you, as somebody I'm not taking the blame for this, but I was a part of faculty leadership in California when shared governance first got codified in California community colleges. And it was just about the time I was transitioning into administration. So I got a dose of it on both sides. And all I can tell you, and my board, my district was one of the early participants in it. But I watched boards for the next 25 years and still now struggle, districts, I should say, college struggle with what is shared governance anyway. And part of the problem people struggle is because everybody has a different definition of it. And different states have different definitions, different colleges have different definitions. I will tell you, just to make it more interesting for you, that at least in some states, and I think progressive areas, they don't use the term anymore. They use the term participatory governance, which if we had used from the beginning, might have had less confusion. But essentially, shared governance this is how I would define it, honors the very important role that faculty and now staff play in helping to guide their institution. And it honors their role, their expertise, especially as it relates to curriculum. The faculty in particular are in charge of the curriculum and charge of graduation requirements and supposed to be responsible for quality instruction. All these things vary. But the key is while they have primary responsibility for certain things like curriculum, when it comes to running the whole institution, and I remember in my early days as an administrator, a faculty member who was, we lovingly called him our leftover hippie, but he took us on for the use of styrofoam cups in the cafeteria. And you know what? We subsequently dropped styrofoam when everybody realized how bad it was for you. But at the time, he thought it was a faculty senate issue. And part of the point we tried to make, and we went back as a college to talk about what is a faculty issue, academic issue, and what is not. So that's, the more that have been defined in your institution, the better. And I know that Pima's made a lot of progress on the definition and the policies and the procedures. What I would like most to stress, and then Catherine, if you have another question about it, I'm going to defer it to Lee. It is an opportunity to participate and to make even perhaps recommendations. It does not mean that faculty make the ultimate decision, except in the areas where you've granted that as a board, such as curriculum, or in most cases, graduation requirements and things of that nature. So it's an opportunity to participate in decisions, but not make the decisions. Your own policy as a district should spell that out, and from what I've seen, it does. Having said that, sometimes the process can be carried out and people don't like the decision. Even if they participated, they don't like the decision. So if they don't like the decision, they're likely to show up in front of all of you and say, if they show up in front of you and say, we disagree with the decision for these reasons, well, then I give them credit for that. They have the right to say that. But if they get in front of you and say, we don't like the decision, and by the way, the process wasn't followed. So that's, this is too political of a statement. I was gonna say that's sort of like deciding which votes you want to count and which ones you don't. But my point is the process needs to be followed, and that's Lee's responsibility, or the people that report to Lee, because a lot of that interaction doesn't even happen at his level. So what's the board's role in shared governance? The board's role is to make sure you have a policy that sounds reasonable, to make sure you have a process that sounds reasonable, and to check in on with your chancellor to make sure the process has been followed. And that's what it is. It's not to get for the board to be directly involved with those faculty leadership, all on my conversation and comments earlier today. If you're in you do meet and confer, right, Lee? Is that what you call it? When I know you don't do collective bargaining, so you do meet and confer, is that correct? Is that what you call it? I'm looking for some response from somebody.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Well, because I started to say in negotiations, I realized you don't formally do that, but it's basically the same. when you are meeting and conferring with the faculty association over those kinds of work condition issues, the worst thing that could happen would be for board members to be meeting with those people. Well, the same is true for your faculty senates. It's Lee's job and the vice chancellors and the presidents of campuses to work with the faculty senates to reach consensus and gather their expertise, et cetera, wherever possible, not the boards. So again, what's your role with respect to shared governance? Be sure that you have a policy and procedures, which you do, and then be sure that they're being followed, which people then may argue about. So then you should be looking for confirmation about the process, not whether or not they like the outcome of it. I put in your packet of materials an article. I almost hate to say this because it's by me, but there's two excerpts that I put in your packet that came out in last month's issue of the Trustee Quarterly. One is about the board's role and policy and all that, and that's old hat for some of you, new for others, so that's there. But it's the COVID article, it's a real short article that I want to call your attention to, because one of the things I caution boards is that during COVID, it has sometimes been necessary to make a decision within 50 minutes. In other words, so much has been happening so quickly that sometimes CEOs, presidents, and chancellors have had to make a decision and not use the full traditional consultation process, not only because of timeliness, but because nobody's around. And so, your alternative methods of communication remain important. But what I ask boards to think about is giving your CEO a little bit more of that grace that says, okay, I understand you had to make this decision and you only had a short amount of time, as in hours. So you had to make it, and ordinarily you would have run it by us, and you did inform us as soon as you could. So, okay. And the same for your shared governance process, because I think what's going to happen is maybe people are settling more into the virtual meetings better now, but there may be times when your shared governance bodies may come to you, a board, and complain that the regular process wasn't followed because a decision had to be made so quickly. It's not an excuse for Lee to go and do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. That's not what I'm saying at all, but just that it's kind of just a caveat. You take a look at it and see what you think. That's up to you. I want to get back to Damian because he didn't get to get his assessment on what you're doing well and what you could do better.
Okay, so a couple things. First, we have a little technical issue. Lee is having a problem speaking and seeing the screen. So Marcos, if there's anything you can do to help, he's signed in and off of on a couple different computers. So if there's anything, Marcos, you can do.
And who else are we missing?
I think we have everybody else. So
Lee,
I've been trying to track it. So I'm just FYI on that. So if somebody can help Lee, that would be great. I would say, I think we've done a really outstanding job in reflecting to the community, number 14, to build a positive image of the college. Okay. I think that was reflected in the recent election, where 70% of the public supported our initiative on the ballot to reframe our expenditure limit calculation.
Oh, see, I didn't even know that. Congratulations.
Awesome, great.
Wow.
So over 70% supported that, which I think is actually a barometer of how the community is viewing the college and our stewardship. So I think we are doing a good job at a macro level doing that. I would say, number 4 is probably well, first of all, I think as sort of part of our institutional commitment to continued improvement, I think we need to work on all of these things. I mean, there isn't one thing on this list that we couldn't do better in some way, for sure. But number 4, I think, has been, because of COVID, the most challenging. You take, Ms. Ripley, when you were talking about, why are meetings structured that way, and now understanding the open meeting law, it's already so difficult to have conversations about the items that are on the agenda. And so many of those things, we've had the study sessions and we've had the discussions and the questions have been answered. And so, when we get to the final decision, we're sort of codifying all of the work that's come. But there is the COVID, and this format is ineffective. I mean, it just is. There are real limitations, and I think we've talked about it a little bit today. I find it incredibly difficult, Dr. Fisher, even being able to see everybody in one strip at the top of the screen, to be able to see who needs to speak. People are turning off their cameras. People are, turning on the cameras. People are having technical problems and falling off and calling back on. And all of that makes it that much harder to conduct and have an effective communication around these issues. And so, as I reflect back sort of on the last 6 months, I mean, we went through sort of the panic age of COVID, and then we got to sort of a new level. We went through all of the transformational changes so quickly, the enormous lift of Lee and his team to respond and put, the health and welfare of our students and our faculty and our employees first, coming up with all the strategies for that. And now we're sort of in this new phase. And I think there are breakdowns occurring. Even this format itself is creating part of that breakdown because we don't have opportunities to be together. And I don't know what the solution is for that. And I just want to put that out there.
I'm really glad you said that, because I think we've all been saying that in one way or another this afternoon. There's no easy answer. However, when we're planning today about what you want to do next, in terms of more professional development, more dialogue, whatever it might be. I'm just looking, I have to look, did we miss, there you are. See, I lost you again. I'm having the same problem. Where did Damien go? Okay. Knowing that it's a problem, knowing that we all thought it was going to go away, hopefully in a few months, it did not. It's not going to go away for quite a while. Then it's incumbent upon you as the leadership to say, what else can we do? And I would suggest to you, you might not like this suggestion, but one of the things you can do is just allow yourself more time to do what you're doing, like right now, because it takes longer to communicate this way. You miss the nonverbal language, like you said. You're busy trying to chair, which also means you're not really getting to participate as much as you might like to in terms of the engaged dialogue. But that's how it is. So what we do is we have to, it takes longer to get done the same thing. Now, one thing I will tell you as a Pima anecdote, you may recall, of course, that we met in May virtually, and we are doing so much better today than we did in May. We were losing people permanently, and you really are doing so much better with the technology is what I'm talking about. And that was one of the things that was my first experience as well. And I immediately started sharing with colleagues some of the things that you were learning at the time. And even earlier, Maria, when you told the story of inviting Luis to your home. I don't know if that's where you are now, Luis, or not, I can't tell. But, because you were having a lot of technology issues and we were losing out on Luis's input as a result, which is not good. So people had to get creative and find another way around it. And that's what I would encourage you to do going forward now. If it means you have to meet a little more often or a little longer, if it's too hard to stay engaged in this kind of format, then maybe it's not longer, maybe it's just more often. But we got to figure out a way to work it because it's not going away.
Hey, Pam, I think we all need to have ice cream like Mark does. It puts us all in a better mood.
Have ice cream? Oh, well, I see somebody has some treats. Well, I was trying to figure out how to give you all caramels today.
Candies, that's right.
Oh, and I actually thought for a fleeting moment, I thought, this is a tradition, Catherine, that I bring these wonderful Montana caramels to our meetings. I thought, I could send them to Andrea. And I went, no, that won't help. That'll just give them to Andrea and Lee. That's not going to help the rest of them. But anyway.
I grew up in Montana.
Oh, you do? Where?
Don't laugh. A little tiny town called Wolf Point.
I know of it. Well, I'm in California and I'm still learning all the little places in Montana. There are so many, just about as many little places as there are antelope and elk, but that's a different story. So before we leave this page, does anybody want to pull out something else from there that you'd just like to comment on because you think it's important to share with your colleagues? Yes, Catherine.
I have a question. Since I'm still learning, and forgive me if this is supposed to be part of my orientation in January maybe, and it can wait, but just the nuances of shared governance. because I totally get, this was a thing at Raytheon. It was in the military of when and where to stay in your swim lanes. I get that. But also, again, in the spirit of the governing board being the checks and balances and the umbrella organization, when specifically say, because I think that's a beautiful thing that we have the student senate and the faculty senate, and I'm assuming that's part of the spirit of shared governance, and then the faculty union, PCC, and I guess the community. Not sure, we can talk about that later, but so I guess my question is, does the board wait until those entities go through the chancellor, present an issue or a problem or a request? The chancellor makes that's the decision maker, and then we hear about it?
Yeah. Okay. Generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
Nothing is set in concrete. And all of those bodies that you mentioned and more exist as part of what, at least in a lot of institutions, called the consultation process, or the participatory governance, or the shared governance. So there are mechanisms in place for them to do that. And eventually their recommendations go to the chancellor. And in many cases, it stops right there. It's not everything comes to you, or you would be there every day, every night, all month long. So many of those operational decisions go through a process, and I'll let Lee speak to that in a minute because I don't know your own terminology well enough, but they'll go through that. And some things may be going through a process at a particular campus, and they end up with the campus president, and they don't go any further because they don't necessarily need Lee's approval. Although ultimately everything ends up with Lee if he had a concern about it. You're going to hear about the ones that are big picture, major changes, in some cases, things that require your approval, but a lot of stuff that he brings you, and again, Lee, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but a lot of things he may share with you are just for FYI, just so you know, we're doing this and this because they're operations. And one thing I did not stress enough at the very beginning, because our agenda just went like that in some other directions, I usually would have started by saying the primary role of the board is to set policy. And the primary role of the chancellor is to implement it. And everybody works for the chancellor. So shared governance is a part of that process. And so a lot of what goes on, you may not even hear about. Yeah, Meredith, jump in, and then Lee, you can answer it better.
Yeah, so I would add, Pam and Kat, that oftentimes, though, not oftentimes, but occasionally there are policy decisions that we need more information on what the staff, faculty, and students feel about it. And so we'll direct Lee to using the shared governance mechanisms to poll a faculty survey or a climate survey about how the employees would feel about a certain policy direction we're looking at. And so we would direct Lee to engage those shared governance activities to get more information.
That's a good point. Usually you would hope he thought about that and did it already. Sorry, Lee. But if he didn't and you directed it, but what would never happen is you as a board would not go out and survey them. So I just want to make that distinction. You could direct Lee to go make it happen. Yeah, Dean.
And we also, the various employee groups have a representative on the board.
Right.
So at each meeting, they also have time to share pressing issues and concerns. Some groups have very effectively used that time to push for change. And I think one really good example is the student senator 3 years ago brought to our attention open resource books and the cost of books. And we created an entire, we directed Lee to investigate, to get with the student, and out of that, millions of dollars for students have been saved in the cost of books because we've been able to move more and more to open resources. But that came from the students. I mean, that really was a student-driven communication that student brought to the board through the shared governance process set up at the board. So that was sort of an example.
Good point.
Yeah, that was more my question was, I guess, because I understand, because at first I thought we don't ever hear about these things. So, but the shared governance piece is that we have student and faculty senates and representation. That's where we hear about these policy sort of issues and requests. So it's not like all of this stuff is done in a bubble and then the board hears about it after decisions have been made and it's a done deal. So that's
No,
what I thought about an hour ago, and I was like, oh, okay, I was
So
wrong.
can I
jump
weigh
in.
I mean, as Pam has said very well, I mean, this is a multi-layered, multi-pronged process. And so most things the board would likely not ever hear about. So you have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And then there are things where the board has delineated what is your authority, what is my authority. And so the things that you've delegated to me as my authority, depending on how that plays out within the organization, you may not hear about it. And so, but the things that are your authority, you will hear about. Now, sometimes I will bring things to you just to clarify whose authority it is for a decision. So a classic example of that was the elimination of football. So I brought that to the board, clarified that it was my decision. The board was clear about that. So I went ahead and made the decision. So internally, we ran a process. We sought input from the employees, the athletes, through that process. And then a final recommendation came back to me. And then, ultimately I made the decision, and then I just informed the board. But not all things happen that way. And then another example is when we consolidated summer programming, the board was led to believe by certain employees that the college didn't seek input. In fact, it was the opposite. We sought lots of input, but the board was misled by certain individuals about that reality. So I was able to show to the board, here's all the things that we did to seek input. And the board was amazed, I believe, I can't speak for board members, that how much input we actually sought before making that final decision. So that's why it's so important that I believe that each of you speak with me, because you might learn that more has been done than what appears on the surface. Sometimes what it really comes down to is someone doesn't like the decision, or someone didn't talk to them specifically, even though they had an opportunity to participate, and they chose for whatever reasons not to participate. So again, it's more of an art than it is a science. And so some of what you've experienced, Kat, in the military, at Raytheon, there's parts of that are very applicable to what we do, but we're more open and more transparent and allow for probably greater input on a lot of issues.
And it takes a lot longer.
Which, by the way, so our business partners, for example, that's one area they complain about, is why does it take so long to develop a new curriculum? Why does it take so long to meet our needs? And part of that is because we run these internal processes to do that. And sometimes we have to run it through the HLC. Sometimes we have to go to the Department of Ed, just depending on what the issues are. So that's why I say it's as much of an art as it is a science.
Kind of using that as a great entree, because I often try to say to boards, here's all these things you should do, and here's all these things you shouldn't do. But there's this great big gray area in the middle that you're going to have to decide locally how you're going to do it. And that's where more of the discussion comes in. There is also a document in there, a little short piece called What is Micromanagement? And we refer to it, Catherine, as the M word. And it's this whole notion of getting out of your lane or getting in the weeds or whatever other metaphor works best for you. But it boils down to knowing your roles, what a board should be doing, what a CEO should be doing. And so you can take a look at that at your own leisure. The heart of it is, to me, after all these many years of working with this, is that most often you will not be guilty of micromanagement, and it's definitely not a good thing. It undermines authority. There's all kinds of reasons it's not a good idea. But most often you will not be guilty of it if a whole board is directing the chancellor to do something. Micromanagement overwhelmingly comes when an individual board member decides, oh, Lee, I just had the good idea. I think you should go do such and such. Or even worse, a board member goes to a vice president or a dean and says, I need you to do this, or I need you to do that. Because which of course is inappropriate, and the accreditation would tell you that's totally inappropriate too. But if you have this wonderful brainstorm of an idea, and went to a conference, sometimes CEOs complain to me that you went to our conference at ACCT and you heard about this great program and you came back, now you want to do it. And so you tell them to go do it. No, what you do is you come back and you ask to be on the agenda and you share your ideas and you ask about what are we doing like that? Have we ever looked, and if the whole board, or at least a majority of the board says, well, that's at least worth exploring. And this is a question new board members often ask, how do I get something on the agenda? You can take it to your chair, you can get it on the agenda, you have a discussion, and maybe your colleagues will, at that very meeting, talk you out of why that would probably not be good for Pima. Or on the other hand, maybe they will say, well, it's certainly worth exploring. Then you turn to the chancellor and you say, Mr. Chancellor, how long would it take you to do this study? And he may say, well, a long time. I mean, that's going to be 100 hours of staff work, et cetera, et cetera. But if this is what you guys really want, we're going to do it for you. And by when do you need it? And Damian would say, yes, but what's feasible for you by when you could do it? All those kinds of things. I just lost you.
Can still see and hear you, Pam.
I know. Can you still see me?
We can, yes.
Well, that's odd. Well, okay,
Marco,
so I can't.
There's something you can do to help. Dr.
Okay,
Fisher?
well, I'll just keep trying to. No, let's see. Hey, we do this enough. We're going to figure this out. I'm going to move my hands away. I probably touched something. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that article to your attention. I know the day is getting late, and we know that we need to try to put together some thoughts about the future, but I would like you to indulge me with one last paper. And the old timers, you know how much I love this one. It's called The 6 Essentials of Good Board CEO Relations. And quite frankly, it relates directly to some of the things we talked about earlier this afternoon. So I just want to draw it back to your attention if you can find it. And I'll just quickly go through them. Good board chancellor, board/chancellor relations. Thank you. Great assistance. I'll keep you. Continue and end with ethical behavior. We've talked about that today. And if we're in doubt about ethical behavior, not going any farther anywhere till that gets addressed. The board and chancellor must communicate with each other openly, appropriately, and even-handedly. How many times have you said that today? The board and chancellor must each know their separate responsibilities. The board and chancellor should each be evaluated annually. You're doing that. The board and chancellor need to encourage each other. Well, this is one where I find boards sometimes kind of fall down a little bit. I can tell you for sure that your chancellor needs encouragement because it's probably the loneliest job you can have. And there's no peers in his organization. As wonderful as people like Bruce might be, they are not his peer. And even you folks, and this is something I haven't said today, and it might help you, Catherine, and Maria and Elise, you might have thought about this too. There's the relationship between the board and the CEO, in your case, chancellor, is almost paradoxical. You are his boss. Okay, that's a given. However, he is the leader of the organization and he is the expert and he should be helping guide you as you're looking at mission and vision and innovation. Now, don't get me wrong, he needs all of that to be coming back from you as well. But it's sometimes hard as a CEO working with the board to be the leader and the employee at the same time. But that's how it is. That's how it is, and that's what we work with. And that's why these first five items on this list are so important. But don't lose sight of the fact that he needs encouragement. And I always tell the CEO the same thing. You know, your board members can get really discouraged as well, particularly when you've got things like COVID and budget cuts and you got to lay people off and you want to cancel a popular sport. Look at all those things, tough decisions that you didn't sign up for, that you have to do. And as I always like to remind you, we know we're not paying you. Well, I should say it the other way. We're paying you so well that you shouldn't complain. But you know what I'm saying there. It's a labor of love for all of you. And then the item number 6 is about the 5 of you and how you get along with each other. And I've heard several references this afternoon that, you know, we could be even more respectful to each other. We could probably list it a little bit better. We could take the time to stop and see how well we are doing. This is an old book, and this one page summarizes about 250 pages. I still find it valuable. Your call whether you do or not. And you can, I mean, do you see anything in there that you'd want to react to that, wow, we could probably do some more of that, or I really like this, or yeah, we've got that. We've got that one down. I just don't want it to just be me talking here. Getting tired. Okay, well, just a reminder. So Damien, I'm going to turn to you and say that the last thing that we had on our formal agenda, because we've kind of gone all around, was to talk about what you folks as a group, well, we should be 2 things. Any unfinished business that we should continue to talk about, or to talk about in the context of what might we do next. In other words, what might we do to increase the likelihood of trust within the 6 of you? What might we do to and make available the professional development that everybody would benefit from having? Do we want to meet more often? Do we want more study sessions? Do we want more formal programs? Do we want mentors? Or do you know it all and you don't need any of the above? So I'm going to turn it back to you to kind of guide that part of the discussion.
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Fisher. I mean, to me, it seems like we're in there's 2 or 3 areas that we could really use some guidance on. One, I think, is, you know, is there some other formal process and rules and sort of strategies we can put in place to help guide the actual meeting? You know, I mean, right now it's it's more complicated. And what can the institution do to support everybody? I know we were trying to get high-speed internet to everybody at their homes. And if we couldn't do that, we were getting hotspots. So just making sure that everybody has the technology tools to be able to effectively participate in the meetings. But I think maybe creating a set of standards for how do we conduct ourselves in the meeting. I mean, you know, people turn on and off the cameras, you know, people, you know, I mean, take breaks when they need them, but in a board meeting, we're all just sitting there together. And so the context is a little bit different. And so maybe creating a little stronger framework about that, or maybe even looking at ways that we could return to sort of a partial in-person setting that could be socially distanced, that, you know, we're separated, maybe it's in the gym, it can be televised, but we still at least are together as opposed to in this, you know, Brady Bunch format. So that's sort of one area.
Can I respond to that before you go any farther? I have now met with 3 boards in person in 3 different states over the last couple months. And they did exactly what you're talking about. They met in a very large room, each person in a oval rectangle type environment, but each person had their own table to themselves and their own bottle of sanitizer and other kinds of things. And they were more like 10 feet apart by the time you went around the whole circle. One thing we learned is that sometimes we needed a microphone for some of the people who couldn't hear real easily, but it actually worked really well. And the assistant came around and the rule was, this varies from state to state, they kept their masks on until they sat down at their table, and then they took it off, and they never once got up without putting it back on. And every time they took a break, the assistant had one of these you probably know this stuff better than I do, I'm sure. It's a device. It looks like a giant water gun type thing that cleans the air. And they went back and went over all the tables. And of course, when they ate, they stayed far apart. So people are doing some of that. Some people are also doing, some members are together and one or two whose health is really compromised stays virtual. It's not ideal, but they found it better than everybody being virtual. So just an aside.
Yeah, and so I think it's something we really need to explore. I think especially in the new year. I mean, I think clearly in Pima County, the numbers are going up at a rapid rate. So I think we need to monitor it really closely. And then if you think there's a safe strategy, also vaccines are coming. I mean, there's a lot changing now in the system. So let's monitor it and really look towards in January a possible alternative. So that's one. Two, I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a need for additional professional development. I think today's conversation is a good start, but I think it's more complicated because of COVID and because of this virtual experience than ever before. Ms. Garcia had mentioned that she wanted specific training in Robert's Rules of Order at the last meeting. So I want to recognize that. There may be other particular types of training that board members are interested in. So, I think coming up with a plan, are we going to conduct and do some of that in a full study session, or can we find somebody to provide one-on-one training for individuals who may be looking for specific extra additional support in different areas? And so I think I would look into the rest of the board to provide input on what type of development we could really look into. There's also, I think, the opportunity to maybe bring someone in who could help with communication and sensitivity and some of the issues that have been talked about over the last few months that have come to the surface to help facilitate additional conversations. But I really want to put it out to the board and hear what everyone else thinks would be useful and productive, because I think, again, I truly believe we all have the same interest at heart. We all care about students succeeding. We care about this institution performing at its highest possible effective rate. We care about our community. So if we can find the tools to help bridge some of these issues, I think it could be beneficial. I'm going to put it out to everybody. Anyone?
Well, Damien, in terms of the face-to-face, and I appreciate that really helps facilitate communications, but I also think, the college is 100% virtual right now in terms of instruction. And I don't want to add to staff workload by us saying, well, we need to show up and see each other face-to-face because whatever reason I think it's working with the Zoom calls, but I also think us getting together in these large tables and all that stuff would add to the workload of the college that I don't know would be that helpful. That's just my 2 cents.
Are there topics, as opposed to leaving format behind for a minute, are there topics or subjects that any of you feel like would really be helpful if I knew more about, and then you fill in the blank? It's Catherine, for example, the Robert's Rules of Order and how you apply it in your district, because those might be 2 different topics, but they're related. Are there other topics that, not just Catherine, but others there that you wish you knew more about? Louisa Maria, you've been around now enough to be both new and knowledgeable. What did you, I'm thinking, Louisa, about your comment, I wish I knew then what I know now, kind of thing. What other kinds of things do you think would have been helpful and might still be helpful, say specifically for Catherine?
Mr. Gonzalez, you're muted.
Oh, you're still muted. Yeah, there you go.
As I mentioned, I do appreciate the session that we're having, and like I mentioned, the first session that I got was that after January, but I think if I were given an opportunity back then in November or December to be part of this, I would have be more prepared. But I still come to the idea that the training for the board would have been more productive and effective for me early then. But also in what I know now, it's been a learning experience. As to Ms. Ripley, I think it's a good start for you, but I think it's overall, I think we all need to, as you all know, the commonality that we all have is the best for our students, the best for the institution, but more important, best for the community. I think, as we all know, that the community has been coming forward even before I got on the board on issues and concern, and that's not going to stop. I don't think it's going to stop. But COVID has put a hurdle with everybody. But I do understand what Ms. Fisher and Mr. Damian mentioned a while ago in reference to coming together with a face-to-face. I believe the virtual meetings has been more productive for my sense. The last, as of June, unfortunately, back then in June and July, that's when I got the new instrument here.
Yeah.
Was but a year and a half later that unfortunately it also impacted my, in that time, not only myself, but also staff in reference to our status of being well. But I think that it took a year and a half to get the proper technology that I see that I have now. But it took too long, and I wish I would have had that proper technology in the 2-3 months, but not in a year and a half. But that's after the fact. It's behind. I think we're doing good, but I do miss the one-to-one, and I think we need to really look at in January. Distancing ourselves, and as you mentioned, Ms. Fisher, I think it's doable, and I think that's what we need in reference to have a more physical connection, and seeing one another, not only a one-to-one, but also having that experience in reference to the body language as we all have, and just sharing what we're there for. As you mentioned, well, we are volunteers, but more important, we're volunteers for the community as a whole. And we all have those different precincts, and from 1 to 5 as well too. But we can do better, and we will. That's all I can say.
That's great. That's great, Luis. Well, are you all even interested in doing more professional development?
Oh, absolutely.
I know. So some are kind of quiet. What do you think about it, Maria? You're quiet, but you have a lot to offer. So talk to us.
Ms. Garcia is muted.
So I guess right now the only thing I'd like is the Robert Rules of Orders, and as things come along, then I'll bring them up.
Okay.
And Ms. Garcia, would that be something that you would want to you would be comfortable doing one-on-one with somebody who specializes in that, or would you like to see it more of a format like this, where we're all doing it together and we're walking?
Well, I think one-on-one, but I'd be interested to see if anybody else would like to attend. Because if there's more than one person, maybe Meredith doesn't want to go, or maybe you don't, but some of us might want to.
So let's, I'll talk with Jeff about what options might be, and we can either, again, we can touch base with Ms. Ripley and see if that's something she's interested in. And if it is, we can organize a special session, or we could provide a special session and then have additional one-on-one support if that's something that you think would be helpful. Again, go ahead.
And the other thing too, Damon, is I think that we need to clear the air on some issues. And so I really need to think about how I'm going to present some of the stuff that I have.
Okay, and again, I think we, in the same way that before we tried to schedule a special session, we can do a special session. We can set up time for you to be able to really bring forward concerns both either in an executive session, if it is related to employment practices, we can talk about a process, or it could be in a public session if it's about issue. I mean, so again, I think, maybe you and I and Jeff could set up a call, and we could have a discussion about how you might like to look at that, so that we could come up with a process that is a framework that is both, meets the letter of the law and our responsibilities, and allows you to articulate what your concerns are in the way that you want to.
Okay.
And may I just suggest that when you have that conversation, because I think there is unfinished business, and that you'll all be better off if it gets closer to finished, that you provide an opportunity to deal with a specific issue as it needs to, but also to look at it more from a structural issue of how do you want to do this going forward?
Yeah.
What did we learn, so that the next time there's an issue, and there always is, whether it's the leader or the board member, how is it we want to follow through on that? And then, of course, that's a discussion that you all need to have. And I'm not putting a plug in for me coming back, so don't take this the wrong way. But having been through a lot of those, may I suggest that you need to have that part of that discussion facilitated? Because obviously Lee can't facilitate it, but you really can't either, Demon, and participate. So it's just, if you really want to take the deeper dive, as they say, think about that. Think about the format and the structure, et cetera.
And I'd like to add that I'm also concerned and would appreciate having an unbiased person. Okay, that's important to me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I was going to suggest, there are professional mediation organizations, and that might be a good way to find that person to come in and help that conversation to happen.
Ms. Ripley?
Yeah, a couple of things just on that point. This isn't new. There's always organizations that have, and oftentimes they're done by offsites. So it's not so scary and formal and awkward to have a team building offsite. I know that sounds corny, but and with COVID, it's probably hard to do, but it could be done in a outdoor big park or something and have a picnic. But I think offsites, as corny as they sound, I'm a mom, it actually does team build. It really does. So there's that, and conflict resolution is, I think, maybe even a separate thing, or it could be done the same way, but conflict resolution is a thing. And there are people trained who just do that as well. And it is important to have someone, an outside organization, do that. So I think that would be important, because it's like, going to marriage counseling. You got to try, the alternative is you throw the towel in. So there's that. And I had another thought. Oh yeah. So obviously I would love to have, because I'm the one that's benefiting more than you guys is, I would of course love more training. The more the better in everything and anything. But I think there's two separate things. So there's how to run a meeting training, Robert's rules, and how to get along and all that kind of training. But to me, that's kind of a given, and we should already know how to do that, but clearly we don't. So we do need that. But I think the training or the other sessions outside of our monthly meetings and our executive session, I think it would be great to choose maybe a quarterly or monthly topic, like recruitment and retention as one topic, or curriculum, or like the big picture is what the heck are we going to do after COVID kind of meeting, And I know that Lee probably has a million ideas about that, and all of you guys have been thinking about this stuff, but that would really help, all of us feel good about our jobs, as far as what are we doing for the greater good of this college? We have to run these meetings, right? But we also, I would love to take a look at, where is the school going to go next? Where are we taking it? It's evolving, it's dynamic, and we all have to be a part of it. And we have to think ahead of it, not react. So I would love those kind of training sessions or meetings or brainstorming or whatever you want to call it. And we all have talents, all 5 board members, we all ran for this office, this position, bringing individual different talents. We're all very different. So I think it would be also fun for all of us to maybe bring in what we bring to the table, whatever your passion is it community, is it workforce development? Is it online training? Is it, recruitment and retention? Is it getting in with JTAD and Earn to Learn? What are your individual passions? And, you be that spokesperson at a meeting, something like that. Anyway, to try to
Catherine, I want to just respond quickly because I loved what you said so much, except for making me feel guilty. And that is that as we talked about so many things this afternoon, the one thing I did not stress enough is your role as a board is thinking big picture and future. We kind of got bogged down in a lot of the stuff that needed to be talked about. But I don't mean that, but yes, you as a board should be the visionaries, sharing your thoughts, even if it's a crazy vision and your colleagues talk you out of it. But thinking big picture policy, looking down the road. In fact, in that same little piece about COVID, one of the things I cautioned boards was that I was seeing it happen is that CEOs, wonderful CEOs, exemplary CEOs are so focused on COVID and survival, which they should be, that it's really often the board that has to say, okay, Mr. Chancellor, good what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. But by the way, what will this mean for us 2 years from now or 3 years from now? What kind of change, what's going to happen? In other words, boards are the very people who should be pushing the institution to look down the road at future. And once you get some of these procedural things worked out and the delineation of roles, then your board meeting should be primarily that kind of stuff, the innovative stuff and the new stuff and looking forward. After you complain about all the stuff that's so hard, you still have to go through that. But then it's like, okay, what are we going to do about it? And then go forward. So great to hear a brand new board member get it. And that's when I felt badly that I hadn't even reinforced that nearly enough this afternoon. But that's a big part of your role, is thinking down the road. And I'm sure your Chancellor would love it.
Ms. Ripley, one of the things that we do have at our disposal is we have a very robust study session program. So these are real sort of deep dives. And so I think what is important, really important, is for you to, really spend some time talking with the Chancellor about the topics that you would like to really dive into. We've done a lot, but as Dr. Fisher noted, one change in a board member is a new board. And so we're going to have to go back and sort of re-examine and rehear some of the things that we've already heard. But I think, articulating to the Chancellor and to me, what are the things that you'd like to focus on and that you'd like to hear more about, so that you can, one, be brought up to speed, but two, really we can start to provide, again, more of that vision and direction to the Chancellor to be able to implement throughout the system. And that's really one of the most effective tools that we have, is through that study session. And we've gone everywhere from having one a month to once a quarter, and we've moved them around to accommodate as topics and issues arise. And we usually try to do 2 sort of big topics at a time over a 2-hour period, so we can really dive in a little deep. So I know for me, one of the things that has been a concern to me over the last few months is, there was, out of the meetings that we had where there was, I thought, robust discussion and disagreement, but we progressed. There was really clearly, something else going on. And, I received communications that said that I had been, insensitive and that I had been unkind in some of those meetings. I think it would be valuable to bring someone in who could really work with individual board members and talk to everybody and really come up with some other communication plans to be more sensitive to everyone's perspective and background. I think it would certainly benefit me, but I think I'd like to see that. And so if everybody's open to that, maybe we could identify somebody who could be brought in to help with that. So I'll take that as a yes, since I'm not hearing a no. Okay. So is there anything else members of the board want to discuss, or how we want to progress and move forward? Again, this is the moment to say it so we can sort of come up with the plan over, because again, the COVID and this situation makes it harder than ever to chart the path. So, these meetings and these moments are so key, I think, to sort of saying this is, because it's going to affect the next few months on how we invest resources and who we bring in and how we help facilitate and shape the conversation.
Well, Damien, I just want to make sure I personally thank Dr. Fisher and Dr. Stinson for their time and their efforts. This is really, really important for Pima College. And I think it's important for this board to have these in-depth conversations and really try to get to some of the issues that are important for us moving forward together as a team. So thank you both for tuning in for 4 hours. It was a long haul in the afternoon. I know you're ready to go to dinner, but I really, really appreciate both of your efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always good to be with you. I'm wondering if your chancellor wants to give us any words of wisdom, though.
Yes, well, thank you, Pam, for that. I was getting ready to jump in. Just a few things. So, Kat, we are planning for either January or February study session to do a future scenario planning piece with the board. So we do that internally. So we're going to open that up to the board to engage us in that process. But we also hold a futures conference with the community. We do that annually. So that's been a way for us to interface with the community outside of what we normally do through advisory groups, et cetera, to get that future forward thinking perspective for the college. Also, I think going back to the top 20 piece and the number 9, and this whole reference to respect for each other. I think, going back to Damien's point, I think it's a good idea to bring in someone to talk with each board member individually, find out individual concerns and determine how we can move forward together. Maria, I mean, it breaks my heart that you don't trust me. And I really want to find a way to work with you to earn your trust. That's very important to me. And I'd be open to a facilitated conversation to do that, because I think you and I are more on the same page than you realize. And I care deeply about this community and this college. And if you've seen over the last 7.5 years since I've been here, we have transformed Pima in a way that people are talking about us all over the country. And so I just want to earn your trust. That's very important to me. And hopefully you would be open to that. Also, remember my staff, when they present, how the board responds to them really impacts their comfort level coming before the board. And we just need to be mindful of that. These individuals, they put in so much time and effort, their dedication to the mission. And then when they have to come before the board and then depending on how that dynamic goes, it can create a chilling effect on other staff. So that number 9 piece about the staff side is also something we should not lose sight of. And also I'd love to do a session on meet and confer. We've done this in the past, and now, Kat, you're new to the board, and maybe we can bring someone in from the Attorney General's office to talk about meet and confer. Meet and confer is a very confusing model, especially if you've come out of a collective bargaining model, and then you come to Arizona in the private and the public sector, and now there's meet and confer, and they're not the same thing. And our employees misunderstand it. Management misunderstands it, board members misunderstand it, but at the end of the day, we're held accountable to that ultimately by the state of Arizona. And so if folks are open to that, love to have the AG's office come and talk about meet and confer, the parameters, et cetera. So those are just some initial thoughts, and I just want to thank you all for your time. I mean, investing in individually and collectively in our professional development is so essential for us to continue to fulfill our mission. And thank you, Pam, Linnea, Bruce, Jeff, who's also joined us, and most importantly, Andrea. Andrea handles the behind the scenes logistics to pull all of this together, because it's not always easy. And then also thanks to Marcos and the IT team for what they do. I'm done.
Yeah,
Chairperson,
Mr. Hanna.
Thank you. Hey, I just wanted, before we are out of here, I just want to say thank you to the chancellor and everybody involved in setting up the COVID testing at 3 of our campuses. That's what a service to our community. Thank you to all involved in that. That was amazing.
Mark, I'm going to take a privilege and say thank you for everything you've done, because I don't get to be a part of any of your parties or anything. So it's been a real pleasure to work with you the last few years. And I know Pima has a special place in your heart. You're not going to go away. So I'm sure they'll find a way to put you to work.
Today was my party. This is my party.
This is your going away party. I'll send you some caramels then. Okay.
Any other comments from any of the other board members? No? Mr. Gonzalez? No? Okay. Ms. Ripley? Okay. Okay, well, again, I just want to echo Chancellor Lambert's thanks, Dr. Fisher, Dr. Stenson, our entire team, Dr. Moses. We really appreciate your continued guidance in making sure that this board is on track. So we don't end up in a situation like the boards of Pima's past have, when we just don't want to, and we don't want to get off the rails. We want to, stay true to the guiding stars and the guiding principles of the institution. And, your insight and your help and being a resource for us is truly so impactful and important. And I am particularly appreciative that you took so much time this afternoon and always to help guide this board and the decision-making process of this institution for our community. So thank you so much. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
With that, the meeting is adjourned.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Be well.
Bye.